Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto was one of the Jedi. At the start of their trip, Naruto and Jiraiya find themselves pulled into the future by an unknown force. With no way back home, and no idea what's going on, what will they do? Join the Jedi, naturally. But there are other, more sinister forces after them as well. With the Force to wield and a new group of friends, can Naruto change the future of a galaxy threatened by darkness? Welcome aboard! Chapter 23. Mace Windu sighed wearily as he surveyed the destruction left by the most recent terrorist attack on Naboo. The square had once been home to an open-air market where most of the town gathered to shop or sell their wares. Now it was an empty, burned-out husk. He had seen far too many such scenes in his life, and it never failed to grate on him that there were beings who would do such things. Even after more than 30 hours, he could still feel the echoes of pain and death in the Force, ripples from the attack that had yet to fade. Such senseless violence went against everything the Republic stood for, and the sight of it always motivated him to bring such criminals to justice. Lieutenant Typho, who was once again accompanying him, seemed to share his sentiments based on his own tired expression. Even beyond the usual weariness and disgust he felt at times such as this, something else was bothering him. There was something about the attacks that didn't make any sense, and he said as much to Lieutenant Typho. "What do you mean?" the one-eyed man asked. "There are not enough casualties," Mace replied. At Typho's questioning look, he explained further. "There must have been nearly 3,000 people here at the market when the attack happened. It was packed tight, with no space for people to run. There were 5 shooters, each with a fully functional heavy blaster pistol. Given those conditions there should have been dozens of casualties," Typho finished as comprehension dawned. "Maybe even hundreds. But there were only 9 dead and maybe 40 injured, and most of those were hurt by accident when everyone stampeded. Stars, it's the same with most of the other shootings. They also had lower body counts than you would expect." "Exactly," Mace said as he frowned at the confusing scene before him. "Even if they were shooting blind, they should have been more accurate. Some of these blast points are 3 meters over the heads of anyone in the market that day. The shooters were missing on purpose, at least occasionally. But if they don't want to kill people, why shoot anyone?" Typho asked. "Why the other types of attacks, the bombings, and the arson? What does it all mean?" "I do not know," Mace said, his expression grim. He was missing something, some obvious conclusion that he had yet to pinpoint. He could feel it lurking in his thoughts, a half-joined-up puzzle whose picture was not yet clear. While he was normally content to let such things come to him in their own time, he couldn't help the swell of impatience he felt at this problem. The stakes were too high for him to be content with waiting for the next clue to present itself, but he had few other options. "Any word on the attackers?" he asked. Typho shook his head. "No. An off-duty security officer in the crowd killed one of them, but the rest fled. If they made it into the old sewers, they could be anywhere by now. Perhaps I should have had Naruto join me on the investigation after all," he thought as he dismissed his irritation and impatience into the Force. "He certainly has a unique way of looking at the universe. Perhaps he might see something I cannot." Indeed, unique was hardly an adequate descriptor for his Padawans, anything, really. He was totally unlike most Padawans Mace had known, including his own former student Depa Billaba. He could still remember what she had been like at the start of her training nearly 30 years ago. A quiet, studious young girl, gifted, naive, and deeply committed to the Jedi Code. Now she sat beside him on the Jedi High Council, a master in her own right, wise, compassionate, and brave. Force, when did that happen? He thought with wry amusement. And when did I become someone who things happened to 30 years ago? In contrast to his first student's calm manner, Naruto was like a summer storm in clothing, powerful, unpredictable, and chaotic, but also warm, friendly, and determined. He was very clever, far more so than he gave himself credit for. Indeed, it often concerned Mace at how dismissive Naruto was of his own intelligence. Since his earliest memories, everyone, even his own friends and teachers, had labeled him stupid. It had gone on for so long that he actually believed it. Thanks to several discussions with Jiraiya, Mace was well aware of how poorly Naruto's home village had treated him as a child, and he could see evidence of it every day. The boy was still just a little too desperate to please others, a little too surprised at being praised, and a little too wary of opening up to anyone. He desperately feared rejection, on a level so deep he was not even consciously aware of it, and while it was slowly improving, he still had a ways to go. Still, despite all of that, Naruto had truly astounding potential. Just like Skywalker, his subconscious mind supplied the treacherous thing that it was. Still, he could not help but notice the similarities between his own unconventional student and Kenobi's. That came with a healthy dose of guilt, though, when he thought about how he had acted towards Skywalker when the boy first came before the Jedi Council. How he had missed the obvious signs of trauma that came with a childhood of slavery he couldn't imagine, but he had. Hell, not only had he missed it, he had actually contributed to the problem over the years. He had been cold, harsh, and overly critical of young Skywalker, and all because of his own fears and stubbornness. Master Yoda was right, he thought. We all owe Skywalker an apology. Certainly, I do, for what it may be worth. A sudden flare of alarm coming across his training bond with Naruto cut his recriminations short. It felt as though something had shocked him, something dangerous. A moment later, the alarm flared higher, and when Mace reached down their fledgling connection, he heard the phantom sounds of blaster fire and screaming. He turned towards the speeder bikes without hesitation and began sprinting towards them. Come on, he yelled to Typho, who clearly had no idea why he was in such a rush. The Queen is under attack. That certainly got the younger man moving. He put on an impressive burst of speed to catch up with the Jedi Master, barking something into his comlink all the while. Mace couldn't tell what he was saying, but he wasn't concerned about it. The young lieutenant had a good head on him, and whatever he was doing was most likely going to help. It was just as they reached the speeder bikes that Mace felt it. His bond with Naruto, which he had been closely monitoring the whole time, suddenly seemed to vanish. All sense of his Padawan just disappeared. For a split second, Mace's heart stopped. Icy fear seemed to freeze his blood, and one horrible thought welled up in his mind. Naruto is dead. Then reason reasserted itself. Mace forced himself to think logically about what he had actually felt. There had been no sudden spasm of agony from the bond, no sense of injury or feeling of pain. Indeed, as he let the Force comb his fears, Mace realized he had felt this exact thing many times before. He must have started using chakra, Mace thought with relief. That always disrupts the bond. The entire thought process took scarcely a second, but Mace felt as if he had aged a decade in that time. Losing a Padawan was every master's greatest fear, and he was no exception. Still, he forced himself to carry on, until a few dozen seconds later, when he felt the bond surge back into being. He allowed himself a moment to sigh with relief, before he turned his attention back to piloting the speeder. A few moments earlier, Naruto moved as fast as he could, desperately blocking the storm of blaster bolts that threatened Padme and the rest of the handmaidens. His lightsaber blurred through the air, batting the streaks of red death harmlessly into the ground or the sky. With the crowd still in the square, he didn't dare try to deflect them back at the shooters. With so much fire coming his way, doubted he could manage that even without the civilians to worry about. Indeed, the only thing that saved him from a swift death by plasma bolt was the poor aim of the shooters. Defense was not his preferred blade style, and he was paying for that now. He winced as he felt people fall, either wounded or dead, through the Force. He couldn't even see the fallen through the crush of panicked beings desperately trying to escape. It was all he could do to keep his charge from getting shot. At least they had the presence of mind not to return fire. With so many innocents around, such a decision would have been disastrous. Criffing hells, he swore. Why are people always shooting at me? Am I really that unlikable? His nervous humor aside, Naruto's mind was racing. He knew he couldn't keep up this defense for long. He had to get them to stop shooting, at least for a few seconds, and without too much collateral damage. So far as he could see, he had only one option. With a strained shout and a serious effort of will, Naruto used the Force to blast the shooters off their feet. Unfortunately, with so much chaos, and his attention mostly focused on defending Padme and the handmaidens, he didn't have the time to focus his attack on just the enemy. Half the people in the square tumbled to the ground as if caught in a bomb blast, and Naruto winced at the ticking off he knew Mace would give him for such carelessness. Still, it did the job and gave him a few seconds to breathe.
For Naruto, that was all he needed. The instant the shooting stopped, 7 Kage Bunshin appeared in a blur of Shunshin.
Without preamble, each clone grabbed hold of one of the royal entourage, and as one, they vanished just as quickly as they had arrived.
Padme and her handmaidens probably wouldn't be thrilled at being evacuated so unceremoniously, but at that precise moment, Naruto didn't care.
The plan's execution took barely a second, from start to finish. At the same time, he summoned up his chakra and made his signature hand seal, Taju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Dozens of identical Narutos appeared throughout the square. At the original's command, they began guiding the bystanders out of the square, clearing the field of battle. Most of the people just stared at them in dumb shock, too rattled to do anything but obey their hurried commands. That was when things stopped going right for Naruto. If he was honest with himself, he was a little surprised that things had gone right for as long as they had. While he would fiercely deny it to anyone who asked, 3 whole, uninterrupted seconds of smooth sailing were probably a record for one of his plans. Usually, he hit a snag around second 1. Here, the snag took the form of a blaster bolt that nearly gave him a third nostril. Without the Force giving him advanced warning, it was only his lightning-quick reflexes that saved his life. Even so, Naruto could have sworn he smelled his hair burning. Sith spit. He shouted as he dodged a few more shots and blocked a few others. How are you guys back up so fast? The shooters, who had indeed recovered remarkably quickly, didn't answer. They didn't even give an indication that they had heard him. Their eyes, blank and bloodshot, just stared at him without blinking. Their pale faces showed only a mix of rage, pain, and confusion, while their hands and arms twitched so badly that half of their shots missed by several meters. Nevertheless, they were relentless, and they did what most poor marksmen did in a fight. They replaced accuracy with increased volume of fire. Naruto cursed again as had to jump away from the hail of deadly plasma bolts. He didn't have the time to reconnect with the Force, and at this rate the attackers were going to kill someone else while trying to get him. Reluctantly, he snapped his lightsaber back onto his belt, freeing up his hands for use. I really need to learn one-handed seal, he thought as he bounced off a wall that was blasted to rubble a split second later. In midair he flashed through 5 hand seals and took a deep breath. Futon, de Tapa. He exhaled a burst of gale force wind that once again smashed the shooters into the ground. It was the same attack that Orochimaru had used against him and his team in the Forest of Death during the Chunin exams, though in this case, it was not nearly as powerful. Naruto didn't want to risk collapsing a building or crushing an innocent bystander by overpowering his jutsu. Even with the reduced power, though, it was more than enough to leave his attackers battered and concussed. He was, therefore, unpleasantly surprised when they once again stood right back up as if nothing had happened. He could see their injuries, including several fractured arms, what looked like a dislocated shoulder, and one scruffy-looking man who was clearly standing on a broken leg, but they didn't appear bothered by what should have been crippling wounds. Okay, this is getting ridiculous, he muttered. So, they can't feel pain. That's just great. Still, pain or no pain, their injuries were severe, and were commensurately slower for it. In the time it took them to get their weapons back up, Naruto created another dozen clones and then reconnected with the Force. A hurricane of fractured emotions radiating from the shooters instantly assaulted his senses. It battered against him, like dipping his mind into a whirlpool of toxic filth. The sheer wrongness of what he felt was staggering. Their minds had seemingly collapsed to where Naruto doubted they even knew what they were doing. It was only the adrenaline rush of battle that allowed him to focus through the mental onslaught. Something's not right, he thought. These guys couldn't have planned this. They're barely even sentient anymore. I need answers. Through the storm of pain and all-consuming hunger, he noted his other clones had cleared most of the crowd out of the square, giving him plenty of room to work with. With a shake of his head, he focused and rallied his troops. Okay, let's take them down, but don't kill them, he shouted to his clones, and leveled his blade at the attackers. Charge! Together, clones and original rushed at the group of 9 shooters. 5 of the clones fell to blaster fire before they reached their target, but it made no difference. 2 of the remaining clones sped through a sequence of hand seals and pointed their open palms at the enemy. Futon, Repusho, they yelled in tandem. Twin blasts of compressed wind shot out of their hands and slammed into the 2 nearest shooters with a dry thud and the crack of breaking bone. Both men flew backwards as if kicked by a rancor, and their tumbling bodies toppled several of the others like dominoes. Before they could recover, Naruto and his clones were on them. Naruto's lightsaber darted out like an orange snake, neatly slicing through a man's blaster and scorching the hand that held it. He followed it up with a roundhouse kick to the man's temple. The attacker flew a meter through the air before landing in a crumpled heap. Whatever was wrong with their minds, they were still a dangerous threat, and he was not about to risk people's lives by playing gentle with active shooters. He wouldn't maim or kill them, but they were going down hard. Between his own efforts and those of his clones, the attackers were down and restrained within seconds. They had offered scarcely any resistance, with some of them still trying to shoot weapons that were already destroyed rather than attacking with their hands. To Naruto's mind, that just reinforced his belief that these people were not acting of their own volition. Something was influencing them, be it drugs, technology, or the Force. He reached for the nearest attacker, a cadaverously thin man whose loose, sagging skin suggested a past of moderate corpulence, and turned him over. "Who made you do this?" he asked. "Who's responsible for these attacks?" Rather than answer, the man started thrashing and groaning. Naruto could feel his fear and pain, both of them spiking to stratospheric levels. The dark, gnawing hunger he had sensed earlier seemed to increase 100-fold into a black hole of craving. He shook the man firmly to get his attention. "Talk, and I promise you'll get help," he said, and he infused his words with the Force to give them greater weight. "Tell me who did this to you." For a moment Naruto thought he had gotten through to the man. His thrashing calmed and his eyes focused on Naruto's face. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but all that came out was a blood-curdling scream of pain. It was a scream that Naruto knew would haunt his nightmares for years to come. There was nothing human, or even sentient, in that scream, just raw, unimaginable, animal pain. The horror shows only compounded when the rest of the attackers, all 9 of them, began screaming too. Even those who had been unconscious regained their senses in order to scream their agony at the world. To make matters worse, as soon as he touched the man, he had felt the shadow of his pain. Even as he recoiled, gasping, the echo of it clawed at his mind, rooting him to the spot. Naruto could only watch as they twitched and writhed before his horrified eyes. Several of them, acting with the monstrous strength available only to the dying, broke free of the clones and grabbed for their blasters. Paralyzed with shock and horror, Naruto and his clones could only watch as they each shot themselves in the head, apparently so desperate to escape their suffering that death was preferable. The sight of their lifeless bodies shocked Naruto out of his stupor. "Get the rest of them," he yelled to his clones. "Keep them still." He focused and used the Force to drag all the blasters away from the remaining attackers. His clones simultaneously worked to pin down and immobilize them before they could try to hurt themselves some other way. It was all in vain, though. Even as he reached out with the Force to do something, anything for the remaining attackers, they started to die. One by one, their screams petered out into quiet, pained whimpers before trailing off into a final death rattle. Naruto could do nothing but sit there, helpless and horrified, and watch the life leave their eyes. What was worse was that he could feel it. More than just feeling them die through the Force, which was bad enough, he could feel what they felt as they faded. The awful hunger, like an empty, bottomless chasm, seemed to rise and consume them. Every piece that remained of their twisted, mutilated minds vanished one by one, until nothing remained but the pain. Finally, mercifully, the hunger devoured that too, leaving nothing but a lifeless husk behind. Within 2 minutes, all the screams had stopped, leaving only a terrible if empty silence, broken by the distant cries of the injured and frightened civilians. As the last one finally died, he felt himself start to hyperventilate. Everything seemed oddly distant, as if it was happening to someone else, and he felt as if he were moving in slow motion. With the strange sort of detached calm that only comes when even raw panic is too mild a reaction, he noticed his heart was racing and his gorge rising. With an effort of will, he tore his eyes away from the fresh corpses and focused on calming himself down. He ran through several Jedi breathing exercises, along with a meditative calming technique that Jiraiya had taught him. It took a few repetitions, but eventually his heart rate dropped back down and the world seemed to snap back into some sort of focus. As it did, the cries of the various wounded civilians finally registered in his shocked mind. "Help the wounded," he told his clones as he struggled to his feet. He managed to stand up without vomiting, a major achievement he felt, and walked over to the nearest injured person. It was a woman, maybe 50 years old, her hair rapidly running to gray. Or at least it would have been, had her blood had not dyed it red. She had a nasty gash on her scalp, down to the bone in some places, probably from someone inadvertently trampling her in the initial panic. Naruto checked for a skull fracture, found nothing, and gave her a quick Bacta spray to help stop the bleeding before moving on. There were other, more gravely wounded people who needed his help. Naruto did not know how long he labored, helping the injured. The time passed in a blur of torn flesh and pained whimpers. The odor of blood and burning hung heavy in the air, more taste than smell really. Amid such an assault on his senses, time seemed a petty and trifling thing. At some point the authorities arrived, and helped replace crisis with aftermath, but he paid them no real attention. Between those who had been shot, and those hurt in the mad rush to escape, there were dozens of injured to tend to. At some point after that, minutes or hours later, he didn't know, his master arrived and said something. He didn't know what. It didn't seem important. He just needed to keep helping the injured. That was what mattered now. He shrugged him off and kept working. All of a sudden Naruto blinked and found himself sitting against a wall, his master looking at him with naked concern. He couldn't remember how he had gotten there, and everything was still a little fuzzy. Lucidity slowly dawned on him, and he realized Mace was saying something. "You hear me? Naruto, focus. Can you hear me?" Naruto blinked at the tone of obvious worry he could hear in Mace's voice. It was almost tender, and it was certainly the most emotive he had ever known his master to be. It then dawned on him that a response was probably in order. I can hear you, master," he said. What happened?" Something very much like relief flickered across Mace's normally stony visage before he composed himself once more. "You were in shock. When I got here, you were almost totally unresponsive. I had to use a force suggestion to get you to sit down and snap out of it." "I am sorry," Naruto asked. He was still confused, and he tried to stand up, but Mace put a firm hand on his chest and pushed him back down. "Padawan, do not be sorry. Be specific," he said, his voice calm and commanding. "Tell me what happened." "They attacked. Those people I need to. Where's the queen? The shooters, they dash." "Calm yourself, Padawan." The note of command was firmer now, and it cut through his panic and adrenaline to reach the discipline Mace had spent the past few months drilling into him. "You must calm down. Find your center. The situation is under control. Queen Amidala is safe. Now, tell me what happened to you, and stay focused. Do not let fear unbalance you." Naruto nodded and tried to pummel his brain into functioning right. He was only partially successful, but it was enough for him to string words together. It was at the end of the fight, after I had them all down. I tried to interrogate one of them, but their minds. It was like they were shattered. Broken. Focus, Naruto. Control your breathing. What happened next? Naruto took a shaky breath and continued. They started screaming and flailing everywhere. 2 of them shot themselves. They were in so much pain. I could feel it. I tried to connect with one of them to see if I could help, and it was awful. Like a dying animal, but there was this hunger. There was so much hunger. It ate his mind. I could feel it. It was. At that point, the memories finally became too much for him. Naruto felt his stomach rebel, and this time he couldn't fight it back down. He turned off to one side and puked up his guts in a series of rattling heaves. Between retches, he noticed his master had put a comforting hand on his back and was sending waves of calm and peace down their link. It didn't take away the sudden nausea, but it took the edge off his growing panic. "I'm sorry," he repeated once he had finally emptied his stomach of even the bile. "I should have done better. I shouldn't have freaked out like that." Mace shook his head and gave him an actual smile. It was small and fleeting, but it had definitely been there. "Naruto, you have nothing to apologize for," he said. "You protected the queen and her handmaidens. In less than 2 minutes, you evacuated the civilians. Even though you were in shock, you still helped the wounded. One of the medics told me you probably saved at least 3 lives with that alone. Your performance was more than satisfactory.
Well done.
Naruto was quiet for a long moment while he digested that. As the words trickled their way through his remaining shock and into his brain, he could feel himself relax. No matter how he looked at it, he had done well, even if it had come with a hefty dose of mental trauma. Speaking of which, Master, why did I go into shock at all? He could not keep the shame entirely out of his voice. He had sworn he would never freeze up like that again during his first C rank, and now here was. It wasn't the most Jedi-like emotion, but if Mace noticed it, he made no comment. Instead, he looked at Naruto thoughtfully for a few moments. Naruto, have you noticed anything about your force senses lately? He finally asked. Maybe you've been more attuned to people's emotions than before? Naruto thought about it for a second before nodding in affirmative. I think so, he said. I could tell that Padme was using a decoy because I could sense her emotions in the throne room. I could sense the fear from the townspeople because of the attack when we were headed here. Stuff like that. I can usually tell what people are feeling if I'm close enough to them. Mace nodded as if he had been expecting such an answer. I think you are developing empathic abilities, he said. It's a talent that some Jedi, such as Knight Sakura, have, one which allows them to sense others' emotions with far greater accuracy, clarity, and ease than an ordinary Jedi. It also would explain why you reacted as you did to those men's deaths. I don't understand, Naruto said with a frown. Why would that make me go all weird like I did? Naruto, without proper training, empaths are very vulnerable to extreme emotions around them. When those men died, your ability allowed you to experience their trauma and pain in a far more intense and personal way than you were prepared for. Master Yoda or Knight Sakura would be better able to explain it than I, but essentially your mind rebelled against those foreign emotions, and the resulting conflict overwhelmed you and sent you into shock. So, what? There's got to be some way to keep this from happening again, right? Naruto asked, a little desperately. He had no desire to experience something like that ever again. Feeling someone's mind shattered, twisted, and then consumed by some unholy mixture of agony and hunger, just thinking about it nearly had him throwing up again. Yes, Mace answered, much to his relief. There are several shielding techniques you can use to protect your mind and use your empathy safely. Again, either Master Yoda or young Ayla would be better teachers for this, but for now, I'll show you what I know. Are you able to do it now? It's best you learn this as soon as possible. Naruto thought about it for less than a second before nodding. I can do it, he said. We've still got a mission to finish, and I can't let something like this get in my way. Mace gave him an approving look. You never take the easy road, he said quietly before sitting down in a meditative pose. Alright, I want you to center yourself in your mind and then find your emotions. That should be fairly easy for you. For a moment Naruto wondered if his master had just made a joke, but he quickly dismissed the notion. If Mace Windu started developing a sense of humor, he was fairly sure his currently tenuous hold on sanity might slip entirely. It took him several tries before he could enter his own mind, but eventually, he felt the physical world fall away. When he opened his eyes, he was in the typical flooded sewer tunnels that made up his inner world. In the distance he could hear the Kyuubi's deep, rumbling breathing, but it was a long way off. This far from the cage, the water on the ground was cleaner, and the walls weren't as damaged or industrial looking. Indeed, here they more closely resembled some sort of ruined stone carvings than they did a sewage tunnel. He looked at them curiously for a bit, before resuming his search for his emotions. I've got it, Naruto said once he had done as Mace had asked. His emotions took the form of a vast, glowing cyclone of mist and light, churning away in a chamber within his mindscape. Occasionally tendrils of lightning would flicker out into one of the half-visible pipes that lined the walls, sending a pulse of light along its length. It felt wild, powerful, dangerous even, but also alive and vital. Now I want you to take your emotions and tag them, Mace said. Imagine marking them with something to make them unique, your own, distinct from mine or anyone else's. Do not tell me what it is, just make sure that you can immediately tell them apart from anything else. Naruto thought for a moment about how to mark his emotions. He wanted it to be simple, so he could maintain it easily enough, but also specific to him. He toyed with the idea of somehow writing his name on the whirlwind in his mindscape, but that felt a little childish, even to him. It would also probably take forever. After a few minutes, though, the perfect idea came to him. With just a few seconds of concentration, the sound of the whirlwind shifted from the howl of strong winds to music. Not just any music, though. It was the song of his kyber crystal, and it was as unique and personal to him as anything could be. Every detail of his crystal, from its shape to its color to its symphony in the force, was etched into his soul. As far as Naruto knew, he was the only person in the entire galaxy who knew or could ever know that song. Once he was satisfied with his work, he withdrew from his mindscape and opened his eyes in the physical world once more. "It's done," he said. Mace nodded and helped him to his feet. "Good," he said. "I want you to do that at least once an hour for the rest of the day, to help reinforce it. It is not a perfect solution, but it should at least let you distinguish between your own emotions and those you pick up from others. Controlling them, though, will be up to you for now." Naruto nodded, and then nearly faceplanted as a wave of weariness swept over him. Mace caught him by the shoulders and helped prop him up until he got his feet back under him. "On second thought, it would probably be best if you rested for now," he said. "Experiencing what you did took a heavy toll. You can sleep in the speeder on the way back to the palace. The debrief won't be for hours. I will wake you when it's time." Naruto just nodded, too tired for words. The 100-meter walk to the speeder felt like it took a month, but he eventually stumbled his way into a seat. At that point, he lost the fight to keep his eyes open, and he let his head rest on his master's shoulder. He was asleep before the engines even started. Naruto was still sound asleep when they reached the palace, something for which Mace was grateful. Being exposed to such grisly deaths as those men had suffered had clearly shaken his Padawan. Whatever protestations he might make to the contrary, Mace could tell that he was not, in fact, anywhere close to fine. He needed rest, and probably a session or 3 with the mind healers back at the temple. It was tempting to blame himself for not recognizing Naruto's budding empathic powers sooner, but he swiftly crushed that train of thought. Even looking back on it, there had been no real indication that he was developing such a skill, and no reason to think he would. Most of the time, such things manifested very young, and were therefore easy to spot. Mace had never heard of a force talent such as empathy manifesting for the first time in someone's teenage years, and had not even thought to look for it. To compound that, Naruto could be maddeningly tight-lipped about his own feelings. It was, he suspected, a mixture of the usual teenage male embarrassment at having feelings at all, combined with yet another relic of his abusive upbringing. Of course, of all the abilities he could have manifested, Naruto would end up as an empath, Mace thought. For all that he doesn't like to talk about them, he is more attuned to his emotions than any Jedi I have seen before. Manifesting at this late must be a byproduct of using chakra all his life. It probably delayed some aspects of his development in the Force. Whatever the reason, what mattered at the moment was that Naruto was hurt. There had been a few long seconds there that Mace had feared the trauma may have scarred him permanently. As it was now, he was not as worried about that, but he resolved to keep a careful eye on his Padawan for the remainder of their mission. Once the speeder had pulled to a stop, Mace picked Naruto up out of his seat and carried him to their quarters. "He's grown again," he thought as he walked. "He is going to be as tall as Jiraiya at this rate." Once he had Naruto laid on a bed to finish resting, Mace immediately went to set up a meeting with Captain Panika and the Queen. "I sense that between us all we have enough of the pieces to get an idea of the complete picture," he thought. "May the Force will it, because whoever is behind this needs to face justice, and soon." Chapter 24. Naruto's dreams were dark. He saw the attackers, or victims, he wasn't sure which. He felt them die, felt that terrible emptiness swallows up their souls. He relived the fight, and he saw every person he had failed to save. All the while he heard the distant echoes of the Kyuubi's laughter, mocking him. "Shut up!" His dream self shouted. "Just shut up! I told you that you were too weak. Even now you flail in the darkness, like a worm. How pathetic! Go away!" "You're wrong," he said, but his protests were feeble. Over and over, the scenes played before him. The random deaths, most of them people who stepped into the path of a blaster bolt by mere chance. The screams of raw agony from the shooters, and the looks of blessed relief on the two who killed themselves. Finally, their deaths, and the horror that he had seen in their minds. Together they wove a grim tapestry, one he couldn't turn away from. See where refusing me has led you. Where it leads you still. How many more such failures can you endure? How many more will die for your petty spite? Naruto shook his head. I won't listen to you. You're evil. Evil? I offer you the chance to stop evil. Use my power. You could right these wrongs in an instant. You could track down your enemies wherever they are hiding and drag their broken bodies into the light. It would be easy. Naruto glanced up and saw the vast expanse of the Kyuubi's cage in front of him. Behind the bars, two red eyes glowed like ancient suns, suspended far above him in an inky sky. The paper seal that covered the lock lay before him, just out of reach. A red miasma of chakra seeped through the bars and swirled in front of him. He could feel the pure, unfiltered power it gave off, along with the familiar malice. You know what you must do. You have done it before. Take my power, use it, and fulfill your precious promises. Think of all that you could accomplish with such power. All you have to do is take it. Naruto's hand began to move, though whether to seize the power in front of him or banish it even he did not know. Before he had done much more than twitch, though, the dream, if it was just a dream, shifted. The cage and its prisoner vanished, leaving Naruto to gaze on a wholly new vista. He saw strange, shadowy figures standing over a vast ocean of stars, one crowned with green, one red, and one gray. They loomed taller than mountains, their faces distant and obscured. One of them, the one crowned with green, turned to face him, and spoke in a woman's voice, one he found familiar. Rest easy now, young one. Rest, and remember what is truly important. His eyes snapped open, and he shot bolt upright in his bed. His breath came in quick gasps until he got it back under control. After a few seconds, he looked around at where he was. I'm in my room at the palace. Master Windu must have brought me here after I fell asleep. Naruto shivered as he remembered his dreams. Whatever had happened with his empathy, it had clearly shaken him more than he had initially thought. Perhaps that wasn't so surprising, though. Even now, he couldn't suppress a shiver when he thought about those screams. And that hunger. That soul-consuming void, swallowing everything, swallowing his. No. He shook his head to dispel the foul memories. When that didn't work, he slapped himself across the face. Hard. Hard enough to knock the rising panic back down, giving him a semblance of focus and letting him think clearly. Yeah, definitely worse than I thought. With a weary sigh, he sank into a meditation pose and repeated the exercise that Masid taught him. It came easier this time, and to his complete lack of surprise, he noticed a few foreign notes coloring his kyber crystal's song. He couldn't tell where, or who, they had come from, but they definitely weren't his. Whatever they were, as soon as he had once more marked his emotions, they seemed to shrink and vanish. As they did, Naruto felt some of the unconscious stress he had been carrying vanish along with them. Not all of it, but enough that it felt as though a lead blanket had just lifted off his chest. As soon as he had completed the exercise, he hurried to change his clothes and wash the cold sweat off his face. Once done, he rushed out the door and honed in on Padme's presence. After 2 days by her side, he could pick her out of a crowd with ease, probably because of his empathic abilities. Finding her in the mostly empty palace was child's play. Once he had a lock on her direction, he beat a hasty path to get to her. As far as he was concerned, she was still under his protection, and he had never checked on her after the attack. Much to his surprise, he could sense that she was quite close and getting closer. Indeed, he had only to round 2 corners before he saw her walking down the hall towards him. She had dressed simply, without the royal makeup or fancy gown, which meant that she wasn't there on official business. As Naruto skidded to a stop in front of her, he noticed she was not sporting her usual inscrutable expression. Instead, she was giving him a concerned look reminiscent of the ones Ayame and Shizune used to give him occasionally. Naruto? I didn't think you were up yet, she said. I just woke up a few minutes ago. What are you doing over here? It's not safe, she snorted and rolled her eyes. You're as bad as Captain Panica. I am perfectly safe in the palace. Besides, I was just coming to make sure you were alright. Master Windu wasn't very specific, but he said something bad happened? I'm fine, Naruto said. He hoped that would be the end of it, but Padme's pointed expression killed any hope of that. He squirmed for a few seconds before sighing and giving in to the inevitable. Something was wrong with the guys who attacked you. Their brains were messed up, somehow. Anyway, it turns out I'm an empath, and when they died, I felt it, and it was bad. It shook me up a little, but I'm fine now. It wasn't a big deal, really. Padme looked startled and faintly disturbed at his description. She gave him a worried look, one that made Naruto squirm some more. He didn't like people fussing over him, but at the same time, it felt good to know that someone cared enough to actually worry about him. It made for an uncomfortable mix of feelings, one that he handled in the finest traditions of teenagers everywhere. He ignored it and hoped it would go away. Naruto, it sounds like it was a pretty big deal to me, she said. Feeling someone die. I can't even imagine it. Are you going to be okay? Naruto drew up every ounce of stubbornness he possessed, which was practically enough to generate gravity, and nodded once. Of course. Padme gave him one last concerned look before she smiled, apparently satisfied with what she saw. I'm glad. Also, I wanted to thank you. That whole situation would have been much worse if not for you. Naruto smiled and scratched the back of his head. Ha! It wasn't much. His smile faded. I should have done more. Before he could sink any deeper into angst, Padme reached out and flicked him in the forehead. None of that. Brooding doesn't suit you. Besides, you saved me, and all of my handmaidens, along with who knows how many others. You had the whole situation contained in just minutes. If you weren't a Jedi, I would be giving you a medal right now. This time, Naruto's embarrassed blush was visible, peeking over the top of his mask. He was, it turned out, still a sucker for praise. It didn't help that, while he had no romantic interest in Padme, the part of him that was a 13-year-old boy had noticed that she was an exceptionally beautiful young woman. Puberty reared its ugly head once more, and it took him a moment to untie his tongue. I was just keeping my promise to Anakin, he said. Besides, I used to do missions like this all the time back on my homeworld. That definitely came as a surprise to Padme, whose eyes widened. You what? What do you mean, you used to do stuff like that? She spoke quietly, her tone calm and deliberate. Dangerously so, if fact. It should have served as a warning to Naruto, but he was still busy trying to shift the mental image of Padme hanging a medal around his neck in front of the cheering masses. As such, he gave possibly the worst form of the truth he could have chosen. Yeah, I was a soldier for my village. My team and I did several bodyguarding missions, and we were attacked on each one. These guys weren't even all that bad compared to some of the ones who tried to kill our clients back then. A conspicuous silence greeted his last remark, and, with a sense of dread, Naruto glanced over at Padme. It was not a comforting sight. Even without his empathic powers, her pursed lips, clenched jaw, and flared nostrils told him all he needed to know about how she felt about that particular revelation. Why in the galaxy had he said that? He must have still been out of it. He hated talking about his past. You were a child soldier? She asked. Her voice was soft and deadly, in the way a razor blade is. Naruto winced as heard it and made to head her off before things got out of hand. He really did not want to go into detail about his past right now. That was a painful enough subject at the best of times. Yeah, but it wasn't like they forced me or anything. I volunteered. Just forget I mentioned it, okay? Forget you mentioned Naruto, you just told me you were a child soldier. That you saw combat. I don't think I'm going to forget that anytime soon. How could a republic world allow such barbarism? Does the Senate know about this? Such a thing has to be sto-. It wasn't a republic world, alright, Naruto cut her off. He took a breath and loosened his clenched fists before continuing. Look, my godfather and I were trapped in stasis for 50,000 years. The Jedi found us and freed us a little over a standard year ago. The Republic didn't even exist back then. That's all I want to say about it, so can we talk about something else, please? Naruto, I just. Please drop it, Padme. Naruto snapped,
and for an instant his eyes turned hard and flinty. Though Naruto was several centimeters shorter than her, in that moment Padme could have sworn that he loomed tall and menacing. She felt the vaguest sense of some distant, terrible power, as if a storm on the horizon had suddenly drawn near. All the color in the hall seemed to drain into the boy before her, like he was all of a sudden more real, more solid, than mere matter could hope to be. Her teeth clicked shut, her breath caught in her throat, and beads of cold sweat broke out along her brow. Then it was over, the moment gone almost as soon as it had come. Naruto closed his eyes and took a series of deep slow breaths. Padme released the breath she had been holding and surreptitiously wiped her forehead. Wisely, she said nothing, and waited for Naruto to finish calming himself. "I'm sorry," he said after a minute. "That was I'm sorry. It's just, I really don't like to talk about my past. It happened, it's over, and I want to focus on the now. I'm sorry for scaring you like that, but can we please talk about something else?" Padme hesitated for a moment and then broke out into an apologetic smile. "Of course, we can, Naruto. I'm sorry for pushing on a sore subject like that." She paused and smirked. "And you don't have to worry, you didn't scare me. I was just a little startled, that's all. Now, let's go to the debriefing. We don't want to be late." Naruto nodded gratefully and took up his usual position off to her right as they started off towards the meeting. As they walked, he shot her a teasing look. "You don't have to lie, you know. I could tell you were scared when I snapped at you." Padme somehow contrived to look politely confused and impish all at once. Naruto was almost tempted to take notes. "I don't know what could have given you that impression," she said. "You looked like you'd just seen a ghost." "I told you, I was just startled." "Empath, remember," Naruto said, with the air of someone laying down an idiot's array in Sabak. Padme just shot him a stink eye. "I wonder if I can still have people beheaded," she grumbled. They glanced at each other and burst out laughing. Their friendly sniping continued as they walked down the halls. All the while, though, Padme kept one eye on her young Jedi protector. No matter what he said, she could tell that whatever he had felt in those men's minds had upset him greatly. She had grown fond of him over the past few days, and she was determined to do her best to raise his spirits. Once they had joined Captain Panika, Mace, Lieutenant Typho in the meeting room, the briefing began. Mace, by an unspoken yet unanimous agreement, took charge of the proceedings without preamble. "Based on what Naruto told me about what he sensed from the would-be assassins, I ordered a more in-depth autopsy of all the attackers than would be standard." He pulled the results up on the holotable. When the tests came back, all of them showed signs of severe withdrawal. They were dosed with something so addictive that they all died when they stopped taking it. "Why was this never found before?" Padme asked, back to her royal persona. Captain Panika stepped forward to answer her. "Before today, there was never a reason to do anything more than a cursory autopsy, Your Highness. All the terrorists were either killed by local security forces or committed suicide. The withdrawal signs are limited to their brain, and wouldn't show up on anything but the most careful subcellular analysis." Padme nodded, clearly unhappy, but just as clearly resigned to it. There wasn't much choice. She couldn't change the past, and for all her idealism, Naruto had noticed that she had a practical streak as well. "Whatever drug they were given left no trace in their bodies," Mace said. "However, the medical examiner believed it targets the memory and impulse control centers of the brain, among others. In effect, it destroyed their sense of self," Naruto breathed. "That must have been why they felt so broken." "Indeed. That hunger you felt was likely the withdrawal killing them," Mace said. "They would have been left highly suggestible and easy to brainwash. This would explain why there were always so few victims compared to what you would expect. They were fighting their programming as best they could." "So, you're telling me that these weren't terrorists?" Padme said, her fists clenched so tight Naruto could almost hear the tendons creak. "They were victims." "Yes," Mace said, and the general tension in the room ratcheted up. Naruto couldn't blame them. He was struggling to contain his anger himself. Whoever is truly responsible for these attacks used these people as weapons. Naruto ground his teeth at the thought of such callous disregard for sentient life. It reminded him of Orochimaru, or those slavers in the Undercity he and Ahsoka had encountered.
Suddenly, as he was brooding on the inexplicable evil of some people, a light seemed to go off in his brain. A series of hitherto unconnected facts all lined up and neatly dropped into place. When they did, he gasped and stepped forward. His eyes lit up with excitement, which drew several curious glances. He hesitated for a moment, though. If he was right, this was going to hurt Padme badly. Still, he pressed forward, resigned to the soon-to-come storm. All these victims were among the missing people, right? He said, in answer to the unspoken questions. We can't confirm it, but that's a reasonable assumption, Lieutenant Typho said. It would certainly explain why we haven't been able to identify any of them. The Trade Federation destroyed most of the missing people's records. Exactly, Naruto said. But how would the kidnappers know to only target people who didn't have records anymore? Governor Bibble said that they only partially destroyed your census records. Some of them were still intact. If these guys were just targeting random transients, you should have been able to identify at least a few of the attackers. What are you getting at, Naruto? Padme asked. Whoever kidnapped these people and turned them into mindless weapons had to have access to the remaining census data. That's the only way they could have checked to see if their targets were still in the database. It took a few seconds for the implication of what he had just said to sink in, but once it had, Naruto felt the ripple of shocked realization run through the room. Captain Panika summed up everyone's thoughts. Whoever did this is us in the government, he said, disgust and self-recrimination vying for space in his voice. How could I not have seen that? Because I don't think they're actually in the government per se, Naruto said. Panika and Typho shot him confused looks, while Mace gestured for him to continue. My clones have been spying on everything going on in the palace since I arrived. No one has accessed that sort of information, or done anything else suspicious. I think whoever this is has close ties to the government, but isn't actually in it. At least, not yet. Padme caught the implication first. You think it's one of the candidates in the election? Why? Because this whole thing is about the election, Mace said. The Force has been telling me that from the beginning. At first, I thought it was about disrupting the process entirely, but it's not. This has all been a plot to swing the vote in someone's favor. Padme was noticeably quiet. Naruto suspected she could see where they were going and didn't like what she saw. He hated that this would be painful for her, but he had no choice. I'm almost certain it was Dane Tapolo. Padme inhaled sharply. That's impossible. I've known Dane for years. My father worked with him. He is a good man. He couldn't be responsible for something like this. Captain Panika nodded, but he looked thoughtful. Dane is a respected public figure. What evidence points to him? For one, whoever planned the attacks clearly had knowledge of how Naboo security forces operate. The attacks have often been coordinated to the response time of the local authorities, and they always had clear lines of escape into areas that prevented pursuit. It takes law enforcement or military knowledge to plan stuff like that. Typho was nodding, but Padme shook her head again. There are thousands, even tens of thousands of people on Naboo with that knowledge. Plenty of them could potentially get access to the census database. This does not implicate Dane. Naruto grimaced beneath his mask. He could feel her frustration and denial, along with a creeping suspicion that maybe, just maybe, her father's friend wasn't as good a man as she had thought. There is one other thing. During the attack, the shooters didn't target Cord. They targeted the handmaidens. They knew you would use a decoy. That little bombshell didn't go over well at all. Panika and Typho both cursed sulfurously, while Padme went pale. Only Mace held his composure, though Naruto could feel his mind whirling away through their bond. You're absolutely sure of that, Padawan? He asked. Naruto nodded, and Mace accepted it. There are maybe a dozen people besides your handmaidens who know about the decoy system, Naruto said to Padme. Dane's grandfather was king. He would know about it. Through his contacts in the security force, he could easily get access to the census records. He knows all about Naboo security procedures the same way. Not to mention, he is the only person connected to the election who's benefiting from these attacks. At this rate, he's got a good shot at winning the throne. Padme said nothing for a long moment.
Naruto could sense the turmoil within her, the desperate wish that what she was hearing didn't make so much sense. The chivalrous side of him, the side that hated to see a friend suffer, wanted to offer some measure of comfort. The more rational side of him, a side that had been growing under his master's tutelage, said that she needed to reach her conclusions on her own. Her silence stretched on for what felt like hours but was in reality less than a minute. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, subdued, but backed by steel. It said, in no uncertain terms, that she was queen and her word would be law. Your argument is persuasive, but it is not proof. While I acknowledge we must stop this madness, and soon, I will not allow us to compromise our principles while doing so. Moreover, a false move now could alert the true culprits, as well as throw the entire election into chaos. If you would have me order Dane's arrest, then bring me evidence of his treachery. Panika and Typho both inclined their heads with a murmured yes, Your Highness. Naruto looked at his master, who stepped forward to speak. If that is your decision, then we will begin investigating right away. With your leave? Padme nodded and dismissed them. Mace turned to leave and motioned for Naruto to follow. Once they were in the halls, he looked down at his Padawan with approval. You put that together well, Naruto, he said. You grow more perceptive by the day. You are learning to trust the Force and listen to what it says. Naruto shot him a suspicious look. You had already figured out it was Dane, hadn't you? Mace tilted his head to one side. I suspected him, certainly, but I was not sure. I did not know that the assassins had ignored the decoy. That was a crucial detail, one you did well to spot. Naruto huffed a little, but he let it slide. There were other, more pressing things bothering him at the moment. We should go after him now. We know he's guilty. Why don't dash? Because we do not, in fact, know that he is guilty. Mace cut him off with a severe look. We suspect he is guilty. Remember, Padawan, Jedi are not above the law. No one is. Queen Amidala was right to demand proof, for both practical and moral reasons. At that, he stopped and pinned Naruto in place with a stare. It wasn't angry or judgmental, but Naruto still felt as if he was being examined, though for what he didn't know. Just when he was about to ask what was wrong, Mace spoke. Naruto, can you keep a clear head on this mission? He asked. Before Naruto could give his emphatic and slightly offended assent, he stopped him with a raised hand. Do not let your emotions cloud your judgment. You just went through a mental trauma, one you have not yet fully recovered from. This mission has become very sensitive, so I need you to center yourself and give me an honest assessment. Can you keep a clear head? Naruto swallowed his initial angry retort. As much as he hated to admit it, his master had a point. Force, I nearly blew up at Padme just for asking a question earlier, he thought. Can I really be level-headed right now? He silently went back and forth on the matter, before his face set with determination. In the end, there was only one answer he could give. I can handle it. I have to. I have a promise to keep. Mace looked at him for another long moment before he nodded, apparently satisfied. He knew what promises meant to Naruto and knew to respect them. Even so, if he had actually thought Naruto could not handle it, he would have benched him in a second. His unspoken vote of confidence bolstered Naruto's own. Very well. In that case, I want you to tail Dane. You are less conspicuous than I am, and more suited for stealth work. Follow him everywhere. Find out if he is guilty, and who else is involved if he is. I will follow up on the attackers. If I can identify them, we may find out how and where they were abducted. Naruto smiled beneath his mask. As familiar as bodyguard work was to him, he had never liked to stand by and wait to be attacked. Here was a chance to do what his instincts always told him to do, find the bad guy and take him down. Even if it was only a glorified stakeout, at least he would be doing something. As it turned out, that something was not quite as exciting as Naruto might have hoped. Finding Dane had been easy enough, as the man's location was usually public knowledge. Following him had been even easier. The man had guards, of course, but no one with the skills to detect Naruto when he was being stealthy. At public events, a change of clothes and a few minutes' work with some hair gel and makeup served to disguise him well enough in the crowd.
He looked like one of hundreds of avid supporters, or like the child of one at least. When Dane was out of the public eye, Naruto used good old-fashioned sneakiness to slip close enough to let him see and hear what the man was doing. With the force enhancing his already formidable senses, a trick Mace had taught him, close enough meant within 250 meters. Usually, he managed to get quite a bit closer than that. He had considered using a henge to insert himself into Dane's retinue of aides, servants, and advisors, but he had ultimately decided against it. For one, no one Naruto could pose as would be high enough in Dane's confidences to gain any useful evidence. Indeed, from what Naruto could tell, none of the campaign's inner circle had more than a professional relationship, and they never discussed much besides the campaign and their political agendas. For another, Naruto did not want to spend any more time near Dane Tapolo than he had to. The man's presence grated on his already oversensitive empathic powers. It wasn't that he radiated especially potent emotions though. It was that he didn't seem to radiate, or indeed feel, much of anything at all. Aside from a constant sense of arrogance and the occasional flash of irritation, his mind felt like a high desert, cold, dry, and lifeless. He also had the excuse that he could not yet maintain a henge while using the Force. Master Yoda insisted it was possible to use the Force and chakra at the same time. They were, after all, just two different expressions of the same thing, but neither he nor Jiraiya had made much progress on it yet. Given how invaluable the supernatural insights the Force granted could be, Naruto preferred to use it while investigating. The last reason Naruto remained hidden was one he would not be sharing with his master, lest he earn a disapproving glower and who knew how many hours of meditation as penance. It was more exciting. The thrill of dodging the guards, the risk of discovery, and the mental image of himself as a cool, undetectable spy, lurking in the shadows, all appealed to his inner 9-year-old. It also helped make up for the stultifying lack of anything interesting to actually spy on. As Naruto soon learned, the life of a politician was one of endless meetings, handshakes, and smiles so fake that he, an expert on such things, was half tempted to take notes. For the first 2 days, Dane was a singularly boring target of observation. So much so that Naruto even began to doubt that he was actually involved. Every time those doubts appeared, though, he would remember the barren tundra he had sensed in Dane's soul, and he kept at it. Eventually, late on the third night, just as Naruto was about to turn the watch over to a squad of Kage Bunshin, his decision to rely on the Force paid off. Just before he channeled chakra to make the clones, he felt a tug at his senses, as if someone were gently turning his head. If there was one thing that Mace had drilled into his head even above the need for patience, it was to listen to the Force, so he listened. The feeling continued and grew until an image of Dane's quarters resolved in his mind. Something was happening, and was happening in there. The only problem was that those quarters were across a courtyard patrolled by armed guards and monitored by security pods. Fortunately for Naruto, it was also shrouded in darkness. While most diurnal beings would have found the black cloak of a moonless night frightening, to Naruto it was a blessing. Beneath its cover, at once as impenetrable as stone and insubstantial as smoke, he darted across the roofs that ringed the courtyard. A few covert dashes and a single force-powered jump found him on the roof of Dane's building, directly above the window into his quarters. With great care, so as not to alert anyone who broke the mold and look up, he leaned over the edge of the eaves and peered through the window. It seemed he was just in time. Dane, who normally refused to be disturbed while sleeping, had just got up from his bed to take a call. What was more, he took it on a personal holopad that Naruto had never seen before. It was bulkier than a standard one, and when he used the Force to enhance his vision, he could see why. It had been retrofitted with a whole host of added security measures. From his lessons with Anakin, he recognized encryption and decryption hardware, signal scramblers, tracking countermeasures, and a black market range extender. In short, it was designed for making and receiving calls with no one being able to trace or listen to them. Unless, that is, they were physically present to spy on the caller. Like Naruto was. A hazy blue figure flickered into life above the holopad. Its features were obscured, but Naruto could hear its voice, heavily modulated, just fine. He idly placed a small recording bug on the window pane and turned it on. It would transmit a video feed of the room straight to Captain Panika, who would show it to Padme. Not even a second after he activated the bug, the indistinct figure began to speak. "Explain yourself, Tapolo," it said. Even through the window and a layered synthesizer, the annoyance in its voice was clear. Dane bristled, though at the demand itself or the disrespectful tone Naruto couldn't tell. Probably both. I do not have to explain myself to the likes of you. I am dash. Useful, the figure said. You are useful. Not indispensable. Do not forget, we are the Black Sun. You live at our pleasure, and it has not been pleasurable of late. Now, explain yourself. Naruto's eyes went wide, and he nearly slipped off the roof in shock. Black Sun was a name that brought up all kinds of nasty memories. The image of a group of young women and girls, huddled, starved, and frightened in the bowels of Coruscant, drifted across his mind. Black Sun had been responsible for that slaving ring he and Ahsoka had stumbled upon a year ago. They were far more than just petty slavers, though. Black Sun was the largest, oldest, and most powerful criminal organization in the galaxy. They had a hand in everything from drugs to weapons to piracy, and every imaginable crime in between. Rumor held that they had entire governments bought and paid for, and entire systems under their complete dominion. They were vast, evil, and nigh untouchable, and now they were on Naboo. Naruto growled under his breath, and the terracotta shingles cracked under his trembling hands like candy glass. Those criffing bastards are going to pay for what they've done this time, Naruto thought. I'll take them all down, hard. It was only when he felt the fox stir in its seal that he noticed how angry he had become. He had crushed 2 of the shingles nearly to powder, and the noise of his teeth grinding together threatened to drown out the conversation going on inside. He took a deep, calming breath and ran through one of the control exercises that Mace was so fond of. Once he had subdued his temper, he refocused on the illicit conversation playing out in the room beneath him. Dane, from the sound of it, had finally caved to the caller's demands. I took advantage of a unique opportunity. Queen Amidala made an impromptu visit to an unsecured venue. I still had assets nearby from the earlier attack. It was too good a chance to pass up. Her death would have all but guaranteed my election, yet she did not die. Instead, you wasted the assets we gave you, put her security on high alert, and drew the attention of the Jedi. You are looking more and more like a liability, Tapolo. Though he tried to hide it, Naruto could see Dane swallow nervously. A spike of fear colored his otherwise barren emotions. When he spoke, however, his voice maintained its haughty confidence. Yes, she lived, but it hardly matters. Even a failed attempt on her life will make the people of Naboo fearful, and push them to me. As for those assets, so what? Make more. They were hardly irreplaceable. I've given you plenty of subjects. Let the Jedi sniff around them. If you did your job as well as you claim, it will amount to nothing. The figure on the holopad was silent for several tense seconds. The pause lasted so long that Naruto thought they had cut the transmission off. Finally, though, the disguised voice hissed out again. Your pretty words do not fool me, Tapolo. Make no mistake, you live only so long as you are of use. Therefore, I suggest you make yourself useful. Clean up this mess. Remember your place. Do not fail like this again. I can assure you, if you do, the consequences will be prolonged. With that, the blue figure vanished, plunging the room into darkness once more. Satisfied that he had gathered what he needed, Naruto retrieved and pocketed the bug. He then crawled back up the roof a ways and tapped his comlink. Did you get all that? He asked. A moment later, his earpiece buzzed with an answer. It was Mace, who must have been watching the feed along with Panika. Yes. The Queen saw it as well. You are to arrest Dane for treason, criminal conspiracy, and accessory to murder. And Naruto? Yes, Master? Do it quietly. With Black Sun involved, we can take no chances. If they think we're onto them, they'll kill any prisoners they still have and disappear. We cannot allow that. Extract Dane and send us coordinates for a rendezvous. Can you do that? Can I sneak a 100-kilogram former soldier out of his own home against his will without alerting the dozens of armed guards and security droids patrolling the area? Sounds fun. Give me 5 minutes. Naruto ignored the pulse of disapproval he sensed over their link. If his master honestly expected him to be completely serious all the time, then he would just have to get used to disappointment. Besides, just because he joked around a little on Combs didn't mean he wouldn't be serious when it counted. He just wasn't above having fun while he worked. A quick glance showed Dane was still awake and reading a report of some kind in his chair. Luckily, it faced away from the window, leaving Naruto free to act. Without further delay, he dropped noiselessly to the balcony below. A cursory examination of the window found only a basic lock wired to an alarm, which immediately raised his suspicions. Even an honest politician would have better security on their bedroom window. When he looked closer, he saw a more advanced hidden sensor grid that would raise the alarm if he messed with the others. If he had tried to disable the obvious security measures, he would have inadvertently activated the real ones. Clever, he thought. Too bad Anakin taught me how to deal with stuff like this 6 months ago. His master probably could have scrambled the security systems with the Force, or else used his skills with Shatterpoint to turn the whole thing to dust. Naruto was nowhere near that level of skill and control, but he did have the set of tools that Anakin had gotten him. 2 minutes of work with an ion wrench and a bit of fiber optic cable and the sensor grid was now diligently monitoring the bricks in the wall. With that done, the basic lock and alarm combination didn't even last 30 seconds against him. "Thank you, Anakin," he thought as he ghosted into the room and crept around to the side of Dane's chair. Before he could notice the sudden breeze from the open window, Naruto struck. His flattened fist slammed into the man's carotid artery, and Dane crumpled without so much as a whimper. He caught him before he could hit the floor and eased him down silently. As soon as he was satisfied that no one had heard him, Naruto bound Dane with ninja wire, hand and foot. That done, he pulled a scroll out of his pouch and unrolled it, revealing a complex sealing array. The seal was mostly of his own design, though Jiraiya had helped with the more advanced aspects. It was a modified storage seal, designed to hold and transport live prisoners. Naruto judged it to be infinitely preferable to lugging Dane's limp mass across rooftops in the dead of night. As quick as he could, he molded his chakra and sealed Dane into the scroll. Once he had tucked it back into his pouch, he crossed his fingers and created a single Kage Bunshin, Henjin to Dane, and try to make some excuse to lie low. "Pretend you're sick or something. Just buy me as much time as you can, and don't let anyone see you dispel." The clone gave him a crisp salute that somehow contained more disrespect than any number of rude gestures ever could, but it did as ordered. Naruto just sighed and thanked the Force that it hadn't actually talked back. Sometimes he truly regretted not learning some other jutsu from the Forbidden Scroll that night. Still, his clones managed to be ever so slightly more useful than they were irritating, so he resigned himself to putting up with them. He briefly wondered if other people found him as annoying as he found his clones, but he dismissed the notion. That was impossible. He was awesome. His clones were just defective. With his task done, Naruto took one last look around to be sure he had left no evidence. If there was one thing both Kakashi and Jiraiya had, by dint of much effort, managed to teach him, it was how to be thorough. To be fair, they had both taught him a great deal more than that, but taking the time to be thorough had been an especially hard lesson for him to learn. Once he was satisfied that nothing was out of place, he slipped back out the window, reset the security systems, and vanished into the night like a particularly sarcastic phantom. Chapter 25. Mace and Captain Panika met him in a speeder 5 kilometers from Dane's mansion. When they asked where Dane was and he responded by waving the scroll, Panika's reaction nearly had him on his knees with gales of laughter. The poor man's eyes had nearly vacated their posts in his skull, and his mouth might have lured in nesting birds had the sun been up. Mace had restrained himself to a weary sigh before hustling both of them into the speeder and flying off. Half an hour later, they arrived at their destination, a safe house, one of many that the royal security forces maintained across Naboo. Panika and Mace had judged it to be the best available venue to interrogate Dane. With hundreds, perhaps even thousands, of Naboo still being held by Black Sun, they could not risk a more formal location. The secrecy bothered all of them, except for Naruto, who was used to such things, but it rankled Mace most of all. Captain Panika was, first and foremost, a practical man. So long as his queen was safe and no one explicitly broke any laws, then he would accept the subterfuge with equanimity. Padme, while an idealist at heart, was also an experienced regent and politician, one who had steered her people through dark times. While she had no love of secrets, she had long since made her peace with keeping them. It helped that she was at something of a remove from the whole situation, not being directly involved with either the arrest or the coming interrogation. Naruto was still getting accustomed to the idea of how justice operated in the Republic. He had grown up in a world of secrets and shadows, where concepts such as due process and the rights of the accused were, at best, ephemera. He had not liked it, but he had rarely thought of it either. It had just been the way things were done, and it was only with time and experience that he was seeing just how bleak a place the shinobi world had been. To compound matters, Dane was involved in the most disgusting sort of slavery that Naruto had ever heard of, and like Anakin, he had not only issues with slavery, but volumes and ongoing subscriptions. If stopping him meant trampling his legal rights a little, Naruto would not lose an hour's sleep over it. Mace was not so sanguine as that. He had seen where the road of hidden justice and secret police led. Seen it and fought against it. He knew better than most just how short that road could be. It was why he held firm his conviction that justice had to be delivered in the light of day, or else it was little more than retaliation, self-defense at best. He recognized that any government needed men and women to walk in the shadows for the good of others. He would not be one of them, though. However, as a Jedi, he had a duty to life above all other things. Specifically, he had a duty to the hundreds, perhaps even thousands of lives, of people that Dane had delivered into the hands of Black Sunday. Those people were not only victims, they were also hostages. Mace had encountered Black Sun operations before, and the organization had a well-deserved reputation for using hostages as leverage and living shields. The only way to save those people was to take their captors by surprise, and that meant subterfuge. It also meant that he needed to get the location of the Black Sun base from Dane, and quickly. Naruto's clone would not be able to pass as Dane for long. Once they had set up the interrogation room, Mace gestured to the waiting chair. "Let him out, Naruto, then stand to the side. Observe and learn, but do not interfere." Naruto flushed. "What? But master, I can help. I want to dash." Mace raised his palm, silencing his Padawan. "I know you want to help, Naruto, but now is not the time. I have not taught you how to conduct an interrogation yet. What's more, you are too close to this." Naruto flinched and made to retort, but Mace kept right on. The last thing he needed was for Naruto to build up a full head of steam. He sympathized with his Padawan's frustration. His reaction the first few times Master Trasei had benched him during a mission had been much the same, if not worse. Still, there was too much at stake for him to bend on this issue. He could sense the shatter points surrounding this interrogation. "You are still off balance from earlier. I can sense your grief, your anger. Beware those feelings, Naruto, for they lead to the dark side." Mace saw Naruto's resolute determination, and his voice softened a hair. "Padawan, this is not a matter of trust. I trusted you to investigate and arrest Dane, and you did not let me down. However, interrogating someone like Dane is difficult. It takes experience and calm. Right now, you are short of both. Do you understand?" Mace could feel the ball of emotions all tangled up in his Padawan. There was his natural stubbornness, a deep sense of righteous anger, and the lingering trauma of feeling such awful deaths. All of it was mixed with a healthy dose of typical teenage turmoil, something even Jedi were not wholly immune to. As he spoke, though, he saw a change. He watched as the frustration in Naruto's eyes slowly drained away, to be replaced by understanding. Reluctant understanding, certainly, but understanding nonetheless. "Fine," Naruto said, a tinge of bitterness still present in his voice. Mace let it go, though. There were more immediate concerns than some teenage attitude. Without further protest, Naruto unsealed the still unconscious Dane from the scroll and stuffed him into the proffered chair. "Cut his bonds," Mace said. When Naruto shot him an uncertain look, he explained. "He uses fear as a weapon. Let him see we are not afraid, that we are strong. Men such as this are usually cowards at heart. Take away their favorite weapons, fear, money, hired muscle, and they become far more tractable." Naruto nodded and stepped into a corner, blending into the shadows. With the hood of his robe up, he cut a vague and indistinct figure, more a part of the background than another person in the room. Mace turned his attention to Dane, who was still slumped in the chair, out cold. He reached out with the force and gave the man's mind a sharp prod. It was not hard enough to do actual harm, but it would certainly leave him off balance and confused for a few seconds. Dane twitched and jolted into the land of the living with a startled gasp. He looked around with wide, panicked eyes, trying to figure out where he was and what was going on. Mace let him. A less experienced interrogator might have immediately started in with the questions to keep him off balance, but Mace knew better. Let him get his bearings, he thought. Let him see the truth of his situation. He will try to usurp control if he can. When I take that control away from him, how he reacts will tell me just what sort of coward he is. Sure enough, after a few seconds of naked fear and confusion, Dane schooled his features and seemed to calm down. It was an act, of course. Mace could see the seed on his brow, and the furious beat of his pulse in his neck. Still, when he spoke, his voice was steady, holding just the right amount of indignation and anger. What is this? Who are you people? How dare you kidnap me? Do you have any idea who I am? You are Dane Tapolo, candidate for the throne of Naboo, former member of Naboo Royal Security, planetary terrorist, and current accomplice to the Black Sun. Mace's voice was a glacier, cold, and implacable in its inexorable march, grinding any feeble protests beneath its grim weight. Dane flinched for an instant, before he rallied and fired back. What are you talking about? Terrorist? Black Sun? What sort of nonsense is this? When the Queen finds out about this outrage, she'll dash. The Queen ordered this, Mace said. We have a recording of your conversation with a Black Sun operative earlier tonight. We have records of you accessing the remnants of the Naboo census data just weeks before the attacks began. We even found several bank accounts you hold under an alias. The money in them came from a known Black Sun front company. Dane was silent for nearly a minute. His face flickered between anger and shock, before it finally smoothed and went blank. His voice, when he spoke again, was no longer indignant or outraged. It was flat, arrogant, and even a little bored. If you have all that evidence, why am I here, then? You don't need to waste time with some secret interrogation. You could just put me on trial and have me convicted within a month. His eyes narrowed. You need something from me, don't you? We will get to that, Mace said, before he added the force to his next words, making them harder to ignore. First though, you are going to tell me what exactly Black Sun was using you for. It was subtle, but he saw the twitch in Dane's face at the mention of Black Sun using him. Clearly, he liked to think of himself as an equal in their partnership, though deep down he obviously knew better. Such an insinuation would not bother him otherwise. Still, the suggestion worked, and Dane kept talking. All the while, Mace kept up a gentle pressure on his mind to discourage any lies. Well, I suppose there's no harm in telling you anymore. They wanted to expand their power into Hutt space. Naboo is the perfect gateway for that. It's out of the way, insignificant, but rich in resources and right on a hyperlane into Hutt territory. They promised to help get me elected, so long as I swore to let them operate out of Naboo once I was king. The kidnappings. The attacks. You must have orchestrated them. Tell me about the plan. Tell me how they were going to make you king. Again, it was an order, not a question. Mace was not truly forcing Dane to respond, but then again, he did not need to. He could sense the man's shatterpoint, his arrogance. He may have been a sociopath, but Dane Tapolo was also a vain, narcissistic braggart. With apparently nothing to lose, he would not turn down the opportunity to explain what he viewed as his genius plan, not even to a Jedi. I was going to make myself king, Dane said, venom lacing his voice. I orchestrated all of that, and more. They said they needed people, subjects for some experiment or other, so I provided them. It was easy to round up some of the unimportant scum, especially with access to the census data. Mace felt a swell of disgust rise up in him at the casual way Dane described his actions. It was as though he were describing a trip to a store or some other mundane tasks, as if they hardly mattered. Through their bond, he could also feel a hurricane of outrage ready to burst from his Padawan. He sent a wave of calm and restraint down the link, and kept it up until Naruto regained control of himself. It would not do for either of them to have an outburst now. As for the attacks, that whole plan only worked thanks to me. I provided the targets, the getaway routes, the security schedules, everything. They would have been caught in a week if not for me. Mace did not allow the satisfaction he felt to show on his face, but inside he could have smiled. As ever, the Force had steered him true. It would only take a few more pushes to get Dane to turn on his erstwhile allies. From the recordings we made, it did not sound like you were a very equal partner. Your handler threatened you, berated you, and you just took it. It sounded like you were just a puppet. Dane actually snarled at that. Flecks of spittle sprayed the table from the force of his rage. That insolent piece of filth. No one speaks to me that way and gets away with it. Mace raised a doubtful eyebrow. Really? Because that insolent piece of filth seemed confident he could get away with it just fine. He made the consequences for another failure like the one a few days ago quite clear. Tell me, what would you call this? Mace gestured around the room, but failure. Dane's anger seemed to leak out of him at that, leaving him looking deflated. He went pale, and Mace spotted a tremor in his hands. Clearly, narcissistic sociopath or not, even Dane Tapolo knew to fear the wrath of Black Sunday. As that fear grew in him, Mace spotted the second shatterpoint, self-preservation. You must have provided them with a base as well. They would need one to operate from. Tell me where it is, and I will see to it you receive protection in prison. Dane snorted in contempt, but Mace could sense his resistance buckling, and pressed on. Black Sun insulted you, humiliated you. You owe them nothing. No one knows that you have been arrested. They will have no reason to think you sold them out. Tell me where their base is, and I will take it, and them, down. Black Sun will be too busy doing damage control to bother with you. With that, Mace could feel the shatterpoints break. Dane pretended to mull it over for another minute, no doubt trying to see if he could get something more for his cooperation, but he had already made up his mind. Mace waited patiently for him to realize that, and soon enough, he did. I don't know exactly where their base is. I never actually went there. But I know it's somewhere in the swamplands east of Theed. The rendezvous to drop off new subjects was near there, and it's the only place nearby where they could hide a base. That's all I know, though. Mace stared at him long and hard, looking for any signs of deception. He found none. Satisfied, he stood and signaled Naruto to follow him. Wait, said Dane. You promised me protection. You'll keep your word, right? Jedi always keep their word. Mace didn't even bother to turn around when he answered. A Jedi's word is absolute. Whatever hole you get thrown in, I promise it will be so deep and so dark that not even Black Sun will go looking for you. Without a backward glance, he led Naruto out of the room. Naruto struggled not to fidget with impatience as the shuttle descended to the ground. It had been 3 hours since his master had squeezed the intel on the Black Sun base out of Dane, something he was still a little impressed by. Hell, not just a little. From what little Naruto knew about interrogation, sociopaths like Dane were incredibly hard to get information out of. It often took weeks to break them down, but Mace had gotten both a confession and vital intelligence in less than 10 minutes. I guess there's a lot more to being a Jedi Master than just being good with a lightsaber and the Force, he thought. Still, I hate waiting like this, no matter how much it's needed. In the hours since they had left Dane, Captain Panika had contacted Padme and left to secure a platoon of royal security guards to help them take down the base. Given how widespread the plot against Naboo had proven to be, he had gone to oversee their preparations himself. He had been adamant that he would not be surprised by any more treachery. Naruto had not wanted to wait for their backup to rendezvous with them, but Mace had been unwilling to even consider assaulting the base on their own. Intellectually, Naruto knew it was the right call, that an attack by just the two of them on a fortified compound with no reconnaissance data was, at best, monumentally risky, but that didn't stop him from grinding his teeth at the delay. There were people suffering while they stood around and did nothing. His knuckles popped and whitened as he clenched his fists for the 10th time. If you feel the need to do something, try sensing the location of the base again, Mace said. Naruto sighed and frowned at him. I already tried that. There's just too much. The swamp is full of animals. It's like trying to find one voice in a crowd. You are trying to use your typical Force senses, Mace said. Try using your empathy. The emotions of sentience should stand out among the animals of the swamp. Naruto swallowed hard and had to shake himself a bit. But, I don't know how. Last time I used my empathy like that, it was an accident, and you know. What if it happens again? I need to have my head in straight for this. I can't. Mace must have noticed the slight tremor in his voice, because he turned and leaned down, bringing them eye to eye. Naruto felt a soothing calm pass through the link, with none of the censure or disappointment he had feared. His breathing slowed, and it was only then that he realized he had been on the verge of hyperventilating. Naruto, I know what you felt was traumatizing, but you must not let your fear control you. I am not asking you to connect with anyone in the base, just to sense them. You may be new to these powers, but I believe in your ability to control them. You are strong, and I will be right here with you. Naruto wrestled with himself for a long moment, before he finally took a deep breath and let the tension fall from his shoulders. Okay. I'll do my best. Mace only nodded once, but he still managed to convey a sea of approval and support in that simple gesture. That is all I can ask. Naruto gave his master a weak smile, not that he could see it beneath his mask. Nervous flutters churned in his gut, but he fought them down. The last thing he needed was to let his nerves get the better of him. Once he was as calm as he felt he was going to get, he reached out with the force. Immediately, a glut of information flooded his senses. The force flowed from life, and there were few places as biotic as a Naboo swamp in early summer. Trying to pick out any specific life forms from the pulsing sea of light and noise would have been a challenge for Master Yoda, let alone an inexperienced Padawan. The sheer overload had already stymied his previous attempts. Still, Naruto was allergic to the idea of giving up, and he had another card up his sleeve. He ignored the clamoring of the swamp and instead focused inwards. He could hear Mace next to him, gently guiding him with both his words and the force. Remember the feeling of sensing another being's emotions. Not their life, not their presence in the force, only their feelings. Let everything else fall away. Naruto did as instructed. He thought back to all the times he had glimpsed his master's feelings, or Ahsoka's, or Padme's. He even recalled the sensation of feeling the attackers from the square as they died. His breath hitched momentarily at the sour memory, but then Mace's presence was there, his unshakable calm soothing his panic before it could even begin. Do you have it? Yes, Master. Good. Now keep it in your mind, and reach out. Do not try to find anything in particular. Just remember that feeling and look for it again outside yourself. Naruto nodded and extended his senses once again. This time, rather than the overwhelming clamor from before, he felt only a few flashes. Most of them were simple, primitive, the basic emotions of the more advanced animals that lived in the swamp. Naruto spent a moment just taking them in, reveling in this new insight into the world around him. After a few seconds, though, he moved on, mindful of his mission. The search was hard. It was difficult to maintain the specific focus he needed to sense only emotions, rather than everything. He could feel the rest of it at the edge of his mind, waiting for a slip of concentration to rush back in, like water held back by a dam. Several times he nearly lost control, and it was only thanks to Mace lending him a helping hand that he kept his focus. His spiritual gaze moved through the swamp like a spotlight, peering into every nook and cranny one by one. After 10 minutes of searching, he felt something other than the basic animal feelings of the swamp creatures. Deep within the wetland forest, several dozen meters below the ground, he felt a tangled cluster of negative emotions. He looked closer, straining his newfound senses, until the indistinct sensation came into focus. Fear, pain. Anger, sadness. No hope, lonely bad. Naruto. Alone. Dark fear, scream fear. Danadano pliano. Hungry, pain for hungry. Naruto. Help, pain fearpan. Dark alona fear. Tired, thirsty, hungry, thirsty, cold. Naruto, come back. Naruto opened his eyes with a heaving gasp. Cold sweat poured down his brow in defiance of the muggy heat of the swamps. Mace was kneeling right in front of him, his hands on either side of Naruto's head. What happened? Naruto asked. He was still a little disoriented from what he had felt. Whatever you felt must have started to overwhelm you. You hyperventilated, and you weren't responding to me. I had to force you back to yourself before things got out of hand. Just rest for a bit. You will be alright. Naruto nodded and let himself slump to one side. The effort of maintaining such a narrow focus, along with the battering his still bruised psyche had taken from what he had sensed, combined to leave him feeling spent. The exertion of the past few days did not help matters, either. While using Kage Bunshin to maintain a round-the-clock watch was not nearly as draining as doing it all himself, it still meant that some portion of his mind believed it had been awake for nearly a week now. For several minutes, he just leaned against a rock and waited for the strength to return to his limbs. Mace stood over him, apparently content to exercise his seemingly endless patience as his Padawan recovered. After the better part of 20 minutes, Naruto finally managed to sit upright once again. Mace didn't waste any time in questioning his Padawan. Are you alright? Yes, Naruto said. He hated how weak his voice sounded, but there was nothing for it. He strove to sit up even straighter, hoping his posture could communicate the strength his voice lacked. Mace frowned at him, but apparently decided not to comment, and instead continued with his questions. Did you find them? I did, Naruto said. They're approximately 50 clicks northwest of our position, in an underground bunker of some sort. And Master? Yes, Naruto. They're hurting. We need to get them out of there soon. Mace nodded. I just got word. Our backup will be here in 15 minutes. As soon as they arrive, we will take that bunker and rescue the prisoners. This ends today. Naruto returned his nod and struggled to his feet. His master's fierce determination lent strength to his limbs, and he used a basic Jedi cantrip to soothe his weary mind. It wasn't a replacement for actual sleep, but it would keep him going for a while before he began to really feel it. Soon enough, the silence grew uncomfortable for Naruto. He cast around for some subject to bridge the silence and lit upon one that he was surprised he had not thought of earlier. Master, how are we going to get into the Black Sun base? We can't just blast our way in, can we? Mace gave him an approving nod. Indeed not. Black Sun bases tend to be well secured, with a focus on advanced warning and delaying tactics. Remember, for all their strength, they are alone on this planet, without backup or resupply. They cannot afford a siege. Given that, how do you think we should approach this? Naruto jerked back in surprise. He didn't know what he had expected, but it certainly hadn't been this. You're letting me plan our approach? What if I mess up? He sensed a sudden burst of amusement from his master, though the man's face remained as stoic as it ever was. Clearly, he had said something funny, but by the stars he had no idea what. He shot Mace an inquisitive frown, and the man seemed to take pity on him. Naruto, I am not proposing that you make the plan alone. I already have an idea for our insertion. I want to hear your ideas, though. Naruto nodded in silent comprehension. So, this was a teaching moment, then. He supposed it made sense. Mace was a firm believer in learning by doing whenever possible, even in the field. With a start, he realized his master was still speaking. With what I have told you about their likely defenses, tell me how you would go about breaching that base. His voice, indeed his whole demeanor, relaxed into the very image of a patient listener. It was one of the things Naruto most appreciated about his master. When the man asked for his opinion, he genuinely listened to it and gave it due consideration. Silence reigned once more for several minutes while Naruto mulled the problem over in his head. Prior experience had taught him not to blurt out an impulsive answer in moments like these. If Mace was asking for his input, then he expected his best, just as in every other aspect of their training. Only once he had ordered his thoughts did Naruto speak. If they focus most of their security on giving them advanced warning of any intruders, then our best bet would be to find a way to blitz through it without being delayed. We don't have time to disable it and sneak through properly. My ruse with the Kage Bunshin won't last that long. Once we're inside their main perimeter, they won't be able to react fast enough to stop us. We need to find a weak point. Good, Mace said, nodding. Where is it, though? The sky, Naruto said after a moment of hesitation. We could fly up high, maybe even into low orbit, and jump down right on top of them. They can't have much in the way of air defenses, those would be too easy to spot. By the time we land, we would just have to find the actual entrance to their base and breach it. We would be in before they had any chance to react. He stopped there, suddenly out of breath. In his eagerness to tell his idea, he had not realized how quickly he had been talking. Heat threatened to rise in his face at his show of excitement, but he fought it back down. His desire to hear what Mace thought of his hastily assembled plan outweighed any embarrassment at losing his bearing. It was hardly the first time that had happened. Sith hells, it was not even the first time that had happened today. It took an effort for him to keep from fidgeting as Mace considered his ideas, his face an inscrutable stone wall as always. Naruto suspected that the man secretly enjoyed making him squirm like this, but his emotions were nearly as closed off as his face, so he could not be sure. Either way, it was a torturous test of his patience to watch his master silently contemplate what he had said. Naruto was on the verge of actually hopping up and down when Mace finally spoke. It is a decent plan, or at least the beginnings of one. I do not think we should be so quick to abandon the possibility of surprise, but you made a good point regarding their probable lack of flexibility. You would need the exact coordinates for the entrance, as well as a whole team with space jump training. That is a rare skill outside of elite special ops units. Assembling a team like that would take time we do not have. Naruto, whose ego had done a pleased little dance at Mace's initial assessment, now had to hide a wince as his master exposed the flaws in his plan. Still, he took the criticism without complaint. There was no judgment or censure in Mac's voice, just the even tone of a teacher imparting knowledge to a student. You were also too quick to dismiss the potential of aerial security measures, Mace said. They could easily conceal sniper droids, hunter-killer drones, or even micro-rocket launchers in the swamp. Any of those could decimate our forces before we landed, along with alerting Black Sun to our incursion. Naruto swallowed his disappointment and tried not to choke at the taste. He had not expected his plan to be perfect, but Mace had picked it apart in no time at all. For someone who prided himself on his quick thinking and clever ideas, it was a little humiliating. His self-recrimination must have traveled across the bond, because Mace refocused on him, and his face softened ever so slightly. Do not be so hard on yourself, Naruto. Black Sun shows their base well. It is not an easy target. You overlooked some things, true, but with a few adjustments, your plan could work. I actually considered something similar, but with you here, I have a better idea. At his encouraging words, Naruto perked up again. He did not bother to conceal the eye smile as it flashed across his face. Then, amid his internal celebrations, Mace's last words suddenly flashed across his mind. Wait, what did you mean you had a better idea with me here? He asked. Am I going to like this? Mace told him. He liked it. He liked it a lot. After Naruto had explained the plan to Captain Panika and Lieutenant Typho, both stood still as carbon-frozen rocks, identical expressions on their faces as they stared at him. To Naruto's dismay, those expressions were not ones of awe and excitement, as was befitting the masterpiece he and Mace had come up with, but rather ones of skepticism and dismay. The men behind them, 20 well-armed Royal Special Operation Guards, all bore the carefully blank looks of professional soldiers who had not yet been told what their opinion was supposed to be, and were therefore diligently concealing what it actually was. The three small toads, one pale green, one dark brown, and one a mottled mix between the two, sitting at Naruto's feet, just croaked disinterestedly. Let me get this straight, Panika said as he eyes the toads warily. Your master's plan is to let these things eat us. Naruto shook his head, mildly offended. No, his plan was originally to have me send one of the toads to infiltrate the Black Sun base and disable their security. I was the one who suggested using the diving toads instead. This way is much better. And you should apologize. These guys aren't things. They're toad summons, and they have names. This is Tenzo the green one waved dash, Haru the brown toad saluted dash and Ito the mottled one gave a loud croak dash and they're going to be helping us out. Lieutenant Typho made a pained noise, much to Naruto's irritation. He really didn't see what all the fuss was about. People always started acting strangely when the toads got involved. They got all nervous and started asking dumb questions. It was getting on his nerves. Naruto, I'm sorry if we showed your friends here any disrespect dash. You should apologize to them. They can understand you. Kichi's been teaching them basic. There came that pained sound again, this time from both men. People made sounds like that a lot around the toads. He didn't know why.
Still, Naruto didn't back down and gave them both expectant looks.
Finally, Typho cleared his throat and shifted uncomfortably before starting again.
"I'm sorry for any disrespect we have shown you," he said to the toads.
One of them, Haru, just waved it off casually.
"It's no big deal.
Water under the bridge and all that," he said, much to the shock of those watching.
Naruto's shoulders shook with hastily swallowed laughter at the looks of surprise on the soldiers' faces when the toad spoke.
"Right, well, that's good," Typho said haltingly.
"Anyway, as I was saying, Naruto, it wasn't who came up with the plans that we had questions about so much as it was the whole getting eaten by toads bit."
"Oh," Naruto said as comprehension finally dawned, and he scratched the back of his head.
"I guess I could have phrased that part better," he thought with some embarrassment. "That part freaked me out too, the first time Jiraiya taught me this technique." "Don't worry," he said out loud. "They're not actually eating you.
They'll just fold space into a pocket dimension inside their stomachs, and we'll all hide in there while they bypass all the security."
"Oh, is that all?" Panika asked weakly.
"Yep,"
said one of the toads, Ito this time. "Don't worry, we've done stuff like this before. Besides, humans are too bony to eat, anyway."
None of the men looked especially comforted by that remark, but Naruto chose to look on the bright side. None of them had outright refused or been nearly ill yet, so they were doing better than Ahsoka or Barris had when he had suggested using this same technique to sneak through the room of 1,000 fountains for a prank. He hadn't even known that Mirielens actually turned greener when nauseous, but it had certainly been impressive to see. Not quite worth the punch in the arm that Ahsoka had given him, but still interesting. "We do not have time for you to be squeamish," Mei said, speaking up for the first time. He had let Naruto explain the plan, with the excuse that he didn't know the toads nearly as well. Naruto privately suspected that he was, once again, deriving some secret amusement wherever he could find it in their grim circumstances.
If he was, Naruto couldn't blame him.
The only way he had stayed sane throughout the day was by finding whatever distractions he could to take his mind off of the seriousness of their mission.
"Those prisoners are living on borrowed time. This is the best way we have to rescue them.
I will not order any of you to do this, but make your choice now."
"We move out in 2 minutes.
Panika, Typho, and the rest of their men all stiffened at that. With barely a second's hesitation, they all stepped forward as one.
Naruto gave an internal shake of his head.
He had spent several minutes trying to convince the lot of them that the plan wasn't crazy, and all Mace had to do was utter a handful of sentences and look stone-faced, and they all fell into line. He could actually feel their resolve harden at his master's words.
"I guess it pays to have a badass reputation," he thought. "I should probably try to get one of those."
He shook off his musings, though, and turned to address the toads.
"All right guys, it looks like we're a go. You know the plan?
We take you lot, find the entrance, and Master Windu gets you inside," Haru said.
"Nothing to it. Awesome. Let's go."
With that, he stepped forward and put one foot into Haru's open mouth. The appendage, which by rights should have squashed the toad flat, instead sank into its waiting gullet in defiance of all laws of physics. As he put his other foot in and sank into the much smaller summons, he twisted around and could not hold in a laugh at the expressions on the others' faces. Even Mace's infamous bearing looked a little shaken at the patently ridiculous sight in front of him.
"What's with the faces?" he said as he sank up to his face. "Haven't you ever seen someone get swallowed by a toad from another dimension before?" His laughter echoed through the small clearing even as the last of his hair vanished into Haru's mouth. After Naruto's display, the rest of the men lost the last of their hesitation.
Mace joined Naruto inside Haru, while Captain Panika and Lieutenant Typho each took 10 men inside Ito and Tenzo, respectively. As soon as the last man had safely settled inside of them, the three toads hopped into the waters of the swamp and vanished with nary a ripple. Inside of Haru, Naruto tapped his foot impatiently on the squishy flesh of the ground. Without the distraction of explaining the plan to Panika and the rest of the guards, he had nothing to take his mind off of the looming mission. While he had done stuff similar to this before, it didn't make the waiting any easier. "I can feel your stress, Naruto," Mace said.
"Breathe. Focus only on our goal.
Let the Force wash everything else away, leaving only the here and now. We have planned as best we can, and now we act.
Whatever happens, we will deal with it." Naruto nodded and followed his instructions. In and out he breathed, in and out.
With every inhale, he opened himself more to the force, and with every exhale, he allowed its currents to carry more and more of his worry away. By the fifth exhale, his heart had stopped hammering against his ribs, and by the 10th, his foot had stopped its nervous dance against the floor. He kept it up for the rest of the journey, allowing himself to slip into a light meditation. As always, the swirling eddies of the force painted a stunning view in his mind. He allowed their endlessly shifting patterns to wash over him, and with them came a warning. It was vague, shrouded in fog, but he could sense some sort of deception, shadows hiding behind shadows.
Master Dash. I felt it too, Padawan.
There is something more waiting for us in that base than just Black Sunday.
What do we do?
Mace said nothing for a long moment before he seemed to come to a decision.
There is nothing we can do.
We still need to rescue those prisoners, and we are as prepared as we can be. We will alert Panika and Typho to be extra cautious, but we will continue the mission. Naruto bit his lip, but said nothing.
As much as he hated feeling helpless, his master was right.
There was nothing they could feasibly do to further prepare for what lay ahead. Even so, he promised himself that he would keep a careful watch for any nasty surprises. I helped make this plan, he thought, as fierce determination replaced his earlier nerves. I will not lead these men into a trap.
Black Sun has hurt too many people here already.
A warbling rumble from the surrounding stomach tore him from his thoughts. It took him a second to realize that Haru must have been croaking, probably to let them know they had arrived.
Mace must have reached the same conclusion, because he stood up and readied his lightsaber. I will go first and clear out any guards. Follow after me and disable any security measures at the entrance. Naruto nodded and palmed his own lightsaber.
With one final deep breath, Mace squeezed himself out of Haru's mouth. As soon as he was through, Naruto followed on his heels. Exiting the toad was an odd sensation, comparable to being squeezed through a tight rubber ring while simultaneously being inflated. It took him a few seconds to pull himself completely out of the toad's stomach, but he hurried as best he could when he heard the distinct sound of a lightsaber coming from in front of him. By the time he had fully emerged, though, all he could do was stare in shock. Mace was standing on a small piece of solid ground with his lightsaber deactivated, looking utterly unruffled.
Surrounding him were the dismembered remains of what looked like a dozen IG-86 sentry droids, some of the best money could buy.
The glowing edges of the lightsaber cuts were still smoking gently. You were out here for maybe 4 seconds, Naruto said, baffled.
How did you dash? There were 12 of them. Those things are tough. And you just dash.
His bewilderment only grew when Mace actually flashed him a lightning-quick smile. It vanished in an instant, swallowed by the customary stone-faced visage, but it had definitely been real.
I got the drop on them. You can be impressed later, Naruto. For now, focus.
I temporarily force-blinded the cameras, but I need you to find us a way into the base and disable any alarms.
Got the drop on them, Naruto muttered and rolled his eyes. Like that makes it less impressive.
Still, he pushed his awe aside, nodded, and scanned his surroundings. It did not take long. Even with the flora of the swamp acting as natural camouflage, he quickly spotted the large metal trapdoor poking out of the mud. Haru and the other toads had done their job perfectly, and delivered them less than 20 meters from the entrance to the hidden base. While Panika, Typho, and the rest of their men crawled out of their respective toads, he walked over to the concealed door, his eyes alert for any hidden traps or security systems. Sure enough, with the force guiding his search, he soon identified a bioscanner hidden in the trees next to the trapdoor. It would flag any large life forms that approached the entrance, and no doubt activate some sort of alarm. He also spotted several unnatural-looking ripples in the water on the other side of the door, as if multiple somethings were concealed just below the murky surface. I suppose they could be stumps, he thought. Then again, they could be automated blaster turrets just waiting to shoot us all to pieces.
Let's not find out.
Using the force, and a great deal of care, he gently levitated the bioscanner out of the tree. Once it was clear of the branches, he slowly moved it away from the door, until the hatch was outside of its range, and then carefully lowered it into a convenient bush. As for the suspicious objects lurking underwater, he didn't sense any danger in destroying them, so he crushed them one by one with the force.
As he had suspected, they crumpled like metal rather than wood or rock.
Once that was done, he moved on to the actual hatch. It was reinforced durasteel, with no visible means of opening. Must need someone on the inside to open it up, he thought. Clever design. Pity they didn't account for lightsabers, though. Satisfied that their entryway was secure, he turned back to check on his master and the guards. Judging by the slicing kit he could see next to one camera, it looked as though someone had looped the security footage, probably one of the guards. Mace looked up at him, and he waved to signal his readiness. Mace said something he didn't hear to Panika, and the entire group moved quickly but quietly over to his position. The door is clear, he said. We just need to cut our way in. Too slow, Mace said, and then turned to the whole group. Form up and be ready for anything. Follow as soon as I move in. Without further explanation, he kneeled in front of the 2-meter-wide metal hatch and stared at it intensely for a few seconds. Naruto could not tell what he was looking for, but apparently, he found it as he moved to place one hand on the metal surface, a dozen centimeters off-center. He gave it a single, sharp tap, and Naruto felt a brief surge in the force. Crack! With a sound like an ice sheet breaking up, the whole reinforced, blast-proof, durasteel hatch just shattered into tiny shards. It was so sudden and unexpected that it took Naruto a moment to even realize what he had just seen. With one blow, a blow that would not even have bruised a ripe Jogan fruit, his master had just turned a multi-ton slab of durasteel to rubble. That must have been his Shatterpoint ability, he thought. I've never seen him use it like that before. I have got to learn how to do that someday. He had no time for further musings, though. As soon as the last pieces of the door had collapsed, Mace jumped into the brand new hole. Naruto didn't hesitate to follow him, and dropped into a dimly lit hallway made of unadorned duracrete. Pipes and conduits snaked along the walls, and cold condensation dripped from the ceiling. It was stark, barren, and oppressive, a feeling made even more poignant by the faint tremors of fear and suffering he could feel pressing against his senses. This place had been, and was still party to such a horrific amount of death and pain that his empathic sense registered it even without him trying. His jaw clenched in righteous fury at the thought of what had happened in this dank prison. As the guards jumped down behind him, each landing with a dull crunch in the shattered durasteel, he had only one thought on his mind. It's time to end this. Chapter 26. How the hell did this happen? That one thought kept echoing over and over in Mace Windu's head as he sprinted as fast as he dared through the labyrinthine hallways of the Black Sun hideout. How did this happen? How did he let this happen? Over and over, the same question pushed its way into his mind, but he ignored it. He had something more important to focus on, that being the bond with his Padawan. A bond which now echoed with pain. A bond which, the sly voice of fear whispered, seemed a bit fainter than it had just moments ago, a bit weaker. Almost as if Naruto were. No! He crushed the thought before it could even fully form and pushed himself even faster. He will be fine. You just have to hang on. I'm coming for you, Naruto, just hang on. 30 minutes earlier. Thump thump. Naruto's heartbeat pounded loud in his ears, a constant drumbeat that punctured the relative silence all around him. Thump thump. Despite how on edge he was, their infiltration of the Black Sun base was going well. He was almost disappointed at how bland and featureless the secret hideout had proven to be. So far, it seemed to consist of a single long, slightly damp corridor. If not for the pervasive sense of suffering and evil that seeped from the very walls, he would have guessed that they were in the wrong place. The place seemed abandoned. Thump thump. As if summoned specifically to prove him wrong, the faint sound of voices drifted down the hall from ahead of them. Mace instantly held up a clenched fist, and the entire group froze. 20 meters ahead, door on the left, he said. Naruto spotted it half a second later and reached out with the force. I sense a small group, maybe 3 or 4. Probably guards. Mace nodded, having probably sensed the same thing. They do not know we are here. Naruto, take 3 men and neutralize them. The rest of US will hold this position. Yes, master, Naruto said, and gestured to the 3 royal guards nearest to him. You 3, with me. Set your weapons to stun. If we take them by surprise, then we won't have to kill them. Thump thump. Together, the 4 of them crept towards the door. As they got closer, the sounds from behind the door grew louder and resolved into what was obviously a raucous discussion. From what he could hear, Naruto guessed the men were gambling. It made sense, he supposed. If they really were guards, then they were likely bored out of their skulls. The base's outer defenses would theoretically alter them to anyone who got within a dozen kilometers, and that wasn't even mentioning that the whole base was supposedly a complete secret. They probably saw guard duty as little more than an extended break period. Well, it would be a shame if someone didn't come along and teach them the error of criminal ways, he thought with a hidden smile. Thump 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 thump. His heart beat faster with anticipation as they neared the door. He could sense the tension in the air, like something bent nearly to the breaking point and waiting to snap. The anticipation was always the worst part for him, and everything about this place set him on edge. Even with his empathy as muted as he could manage, the nearby suffering and death was an irritating grain of sand lodged in the back of his mind, itching and prickling and wrong. Thump 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 thump. When they reached the door, after what felt like a geologic epoch, Naruto noted with some relief that it looked well maintained. That was good, as it meant it probably opened with very little noise. He signaled the men to stack up behind him and readied himself to open the door. Thump 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 thump. He tapped the control panel and opened the door. As he had thought, hoped more like, it slid open with hardly a whisper. None of the people in the room seemed to have heard it, if their continued conversation was anything to go by. Still, they would notice quickly enough, so there was no point in hesitating. With swift, near-silent steps, he slipped into the room. Thump thump. It was odd, he noted idly, how it was both anticlimactic and also immensely satisfying to finally step through the door. On the one hand, nothing had really happened. On the other hand, he was finally doing something. The danger was here, he was in it, and there was no place Naruto felt more comfortable than in the middle of everything. Thump thump. There were 4 men in the room, all of them sitting around a table playing cards. Naruto thought it might have been Sabak. They wore the typical dark, hard-wearing clothes of Black Sun foot soldiers working away from their usual domains. A double-barreled blaster pistol, the distinctive sidearm that Black Sun operatives favored, hung from each of their belts. 2 were human, while the other 2 were Falleen. All of them had cups in front of them, and the sharp stench of alcohol hung heavy in the air. Thump thump. It took Naruto less than half a second to take all of it in, and he didn't even break his stride. In the span of 2 heartbeats, he was within striking distance of the nearest guard. As he pulled his hand back to deliver a stunning blow, one of the other guards finally noticed him. The shocked man jerked backwards and opened his mouth to shout a warning. Wah dash. He never got past the first syllable. His shout turned into a strangled grunt when a stun bolt caught him full in the face. He twitched violently and collapsed backwards over his chair. Nearly at the same moment, Naruto knocked his target out with a swift blow to the base of the skull, and 2 more stun bolts took out the last 2 men. The whole affair was over in less than a second. Thump thump. Tie them up. We don't want them going anywhere, Naruto said. The royal guards immediately moved forward and restrained the unconscious gang members with stun cuffs while he collected and disabled their weapons. A quick search of the unconscious men revealed a half-dozen hidden vibroblades and holdout blasters, which he promptly relieved them of. With that done and their targets successfully restrained, Naruto and the 3 guards moved back into the hall to reconnect with Mace and the others. Once he was in front of his master, Naruto gave his report. 4 men, all unconscious and restrained. It all went smoothly. No one heard a thing. Naturally, at that moment, a wailing alarm split the air and red lights began to flash along the walls. A solid-looking blast door slammed down over the room he had just left with a resounding thud. Another one closes behind them, cutting them off from the only exit. Old instincts born from years of pulling pranks and getting caught delivered the next words straight into Naruto's mouth without consulting the rest of his brain. It wasn't me, he said, and blushed when he heard himself. For what had to be the 1000th time, he found himself profoundly grateful for the way his mask hid such things from the world. No wonder Kakashi had such a reputation for being inscrutable. The mask had done most of the work for him. Mace cocked an eyebrow but did not comment. They must have recycled their surveillance system, he said. We need to move, now. It was too late, though. Even as Naruto made to follow his master's order, a series of sharp cracks echoed down the hall. What he saw next made his blood run cold. Large sections of the walls collapsed into the corridor, revealing row upon row of crouched B-1 battle droids, dozens that Naruto could see, all armed and activated. With a series of mechanical whirs and clicks, the droids stood up and stepped into the hall, their blasters already sweeping around to target the intruders. "Take cover," Panika shouted, but Naruto could tell in an instant that it wouldn't do any good. They were stuck in a featureless hallway with no corners or alcoves. There was nothing to take cover behind, no shelter from the deadly blaster fire that was sure to come their way. They were stuck in a kill box with no way out. "Naruto, with me," Mace shouted, shocking his Padawan into action. "Shield them. The rest of you, take those droids out, quickly." Master and Padawan stood side by side and activated their lightsabers, bathing the walls in orange and violet light, and not a moment too soon. The droids opened fire, sending a hail of red death lancing towards them. Instantly Naruto's world narrowed down to those bolts, his blade, and the Force. His arms moved almost before he commanded them to, batting bolt after lethal bolt into the floor, the walls, the ceiling, and even back into the droids themselves. He was dimly aware of the guards behind him, flattened against the walls as best they could to avoid those shots which made it through. Not all the blaster fire in the hall was from the droids. Plenty of it came from Panika, Typho, and their men. Their careful, methodical shots steadily brought down droid after droid, filling the air with the acrid smell of burned wiring and scorched metal. It was not enough, however. For every droid that fell, there was another ready to take its place. He was also dimly aware of his master standing barely 2 meters away on his right. Mace's violet blade may as well have been a solid wall of energy. He reflected the bolts back so fast it seemed he sometimes had to wait for the droids to catch up and send more his way. He didn't scatter them harmlessly into the walls, either. No, he returned them with a lethal precision that had already turned nearly a dozen droids into scrap. In contrast, Naruto was barely keeping up. He had the speed, certainly, and the Force to guide him, but he was feeling his lackluster defensive skills now. His style favored offense, but offense was not an option right now. He could not spare the focus he would need to take the fight to the enemy, not with the men behind him to protect. Indeed, he could hardly spare the focus needed to berate himself for ignoring his master all the times he had told him to improve his defense before working on his offense. In the deadly dance he found himself in, it was all he could do to stay one step ahead of the droids. Where the hell did they get all these droids? He shouted, not really expecting an answer. To his surprise, though, he got one. "They must have found an old Trade Federation transport from the occupation," Typho shouted back. "They left hundreds behind when they pulled out." "How many droids?" Mace asked, having apparently overheard them. Nothing on his face betrayed that he was blocking the combined fire of a platoon of battle droids. If it was a fully loaded carrier, and they took them all, then they could have as much as an entire battalion here. That's over 7,000 battle droids. Naruto inhaled sharply, and nearly missed his next block. That was definitely more droids than they could deal with, even if they didn't have to worry about saving the hostages. Still, behind his trepidation, he could feel something niggling at the back of his mind, the beginning of an idea that he couldn't quite tease into life yet. "Look on the bright side. At least they're just droids," one of the guards said. Naturally, at that moment, things got worse. A half-dozen Black Sun soldiers pushed their way through droids and took up positions near the front of the line. Each had a double-barreled blaster pistol, and unlike the droids, they had excellent aim. The twin bolts from their unique weapons were difficult to block, especially with the rest of the fire from the droids, and they knew how to coordinate their shots to force gaps in the Jedi's defenses. Within a few seconds, their strategy proved successful, as first one guard, and then another, fell to the ground with sizzling holes burned through where their faces had once been. For the second time that mission, the stench of burned blood and scorched flesh filled Naruto's nostrils. He frowned as he felt their lives wink out, and his grip on his lightsaber tightened with anger. "We can't stay here," Mace yelled. "Push forward." Apparently, he meant that literally, as he thrust his hand out and unleashed the most powerful force push Naruto had ever seen. The front line of droids was pulverized into scrap by the strength of Mace's blow. The rest fared little better, being blasted off their feet and flung back down the hall in a shower of sparks and shattered armor plating. The Black Sun soldiers did not escape, either. They tumbled back right along with their droids and landed in a stunned, bloodied heap amidst a pile of broken metal bodies. With the incoming fire abruptly cut off and the force shrinking his already lightning-fast reaction time down to nothing, bordering on negative, it took only a fraction of a second before Naruto sent his own force push down the hall. While not as powerful as his master's, it certainly wasn't lacking strength. The walls shook, the lights flickered, and the remaining droids went down beneath a storm of flying scrap and raw power. It was when he saw one of those pieces of scrap, a bent comms antenna from one of the droids, that the half-formed thought in the back of his mind finally resolved into an actual idea. As soon as the hall was clear, he turned to Typho. "Hey, you said these droids came from the occupation, right?" "That's right." "What of it?" "That means that they need a central computer to control them. That's how Anakin beat them before, by destroying their command ship. If Black Sun has set up their own droid command system, then all we need to do is shut it down and the droids will follow," Mace broke in. "Excellent thinking, Naruto. We need to get to their central control room. It is the most likely location of that command system." "We'll need to find it first," Panika said from where he was kneeling by one of the fallen guards. "How are we supposed to do that in time?" Mace glanced at the ceiling, where thick cable conduits ran in rows. "These wires must control the security systems and blast doors. They will route back to the control room. All we have to do is follow them. Now hurry. I can hear more droids coming this way." Naruto could also hear the menacing clank of metal footsteps getting ever closer. The hard walls bounced the sound around too much for him to accurately judge distance, but as far as he was concerned, they were too close already. He started off down the hallway, following the conduit with Mace and the others right on his heels. As he passed the downed droids, he occasionally swiped his lightsaber to destroy one that was still moving. The last thing they needed was enemies at their back. He could also do without the enemies at their front, but he supposed life was just full of disappointments. As they ran, he spotted more blast doors cutting off certain sections of the base. Fortunately, none of them had so far blocked their path to the control room. Naruto wasn't sure how he felt about that. While it was nice not to have to carve through a blast door, he was not thrilled at the idea of them going where the enemy clearly wanted them to go. When he voiced his concerns to Mace, the man's reply was less than comforting. "It is either a trap or it is not. Either way, shutting down those droids is our best chance at completing the mission." Naruto winced at the bluntness of the statement, but found that he could not disagree. Whatever trap they may or may not be walking into could be survivable. The endless hordes of battle droids that would eventually surround them would not be. Escape was not an option, and standing their ground was pointless, so forward was the only option. Besides, it might not be a trap after all, he thought. Maybe they just wanted good fields of fire for the droids. This hall barely has any turns after all. It's not like all the other passages were blocked, either. Maybe they ran short of blast doors and there's just one right outside the control room. Hell, maybe dash. He didn't have a chance to complete that thought, however, because right as he rounded a corner, the Force sent him a warning. It was just in time too, because he suddenly found himself facing another platoon of droids, this one easily 100 strong, with another 4 Black Sun soldiers leading it at the front, all of them lying in ambush. He was moving too fast to stop in time, so he shouted a warning to the guards, put on one last burst of speed, and jumped. His sudden leap took right over the first volley of blaster fire, and his momentum carried him over the head of the foremost soldier. As he passed over the startled Fauline's head, he tucked into a front flip and brought his lightsaber down in a single, short slash. The orange blade cleaved through the soldier's head vertically, back to front, from mouth to crown. Something sizzled, and the sickening smell of charred meat permeated the air. The man didn't even twitch. He just crumpled like a limp rag, and the flash-boiled remnants of his brain spilled onto the floor in a gently steaming pile of gore. Naruto had no time for revulsion, however. His momentum was still carrying him forward, and he had to capitalize on it. He completed his flip just in time to ram his boot into the face of the next Black Sun soldier. The man's nose broke with an ugly crunch, and a mix of blood, spit, and teeth flew from his mouth. The force of Naruto's kick sent his unconscious body lying into the legs of the front row of droids, tripping them up and sending 2 of them crashing to the ground. As he landed, Naruto deactivated his lightsaber and ducked into a roll, thus passing underneath the next round of blaster fire. In one fluid motion, he reactivated his lightsaber and sprung up from his roll with 2 wide slashes around his whole body. His blade hummed, sparks flew, and the 5 droids nearest to him collapsed, their limbs and torsos sliced through. He stood with a triumphant shout, having carved straight through the front ranks of his would-be assailants in barely 2 seconds. It was then that Naruto realized his mistake. In his rush to engage the enemy and stymie their ambush, he had let his impromptu charge carry him too far into the droids' formation. He was surrounded, with at least 100 droids to his front and sides, and the last 2 Black Sun soldiers behind him. All of them had blasters leveled at him. Ah, stang! He inhaled sharply and tightened his grip on his lightsaber. Time seemed to slow. He could see the droids' fingers tightening on their triggers, millimeter by millimeter. An instant before they opened fire, though, a violet thunderbolt of pure destruction blitzed through the droids and soldiers, sending metal limbs and destroyed blasters flying. Before Naruto's very relieved eyes, the whirlwind of purple resolved into his master, moving as Naruto had never seen him move before. He had always known, on some level at least, that Mace held back during their spars. It only made sense, after all. The man was trying to teach him, not flatten him into the ground. It was only now, watching him move like a wildfire, dangerous and untamable, that Naruto started to get a sense of just how much his master toned down his skills when training with him. It looked as though Mace had 10 arms and 5 lightsabers, his blade was moving so fast. Every strike turned into a block, turned into another strike, turned into a stab. If a droid did not fall to his whirling blade, then a blow from the force smashed it to pieces. It was ferocity and grace and violence elevated into art, and all Naruto could do was look on in awe. The royal guards made their own contribution to the fray. With carefully aimed shots, to avoid hitting their Jedi allies, they rapidly whittled down the enemy numbers one droid after another. It was only after one of their shots took out a droid that had been aiming for him that Naruto snapped out of his shocked trance. 2/3 of the droid platoon already lay in ruins, but there was still plenty left for him to do. After a quick glance at the battlefield, he reached out with the force, grabbed hold of the dismembered droids laying all around him, and sent a wave of scrap scything across the ground. His attack knocked the legs out from under half of the remaining droids. Before they could recover, he rushed forward, drawing level with his master, and swiftly dispatched the fallen droids with 2 long, low sweeps of his lightsaber. The moment he had finished, he pivoted to strike at what remained of the squad his master had engaged, scarcely a dozen droids. With 2 Jedi bearing down on them, one of them Mace Windu, the poor droids lasted all of 4 seconds, and then it was over. When the last droid fell to the ground with its head severed, Mace deactivated his lightsaber and took stock of his surroundings. First, he made sure his Padawan was unhurt. Naruto had reacted with admirable speed to the sudden ambush he had stumbled into, but he had also placed himself in just about the worst position he could have. He still reacts rashly when surprised. I will have to drill him in rapid tactical decision-making, Mace thought, before he turned to check on the rest of the men. Sadly, he saw as he turned around, the droids and the Black Sun soldiers were not the only casualties. Naruto's warning had apparently come too late to save one of the guards whose body lay crumpled on the ground, limbs akimbo, riddled with blaster fire. Mace sighed when he spotted the body. We need to keep moving. We must be close by now, and staying put is a death sentence. If any of the soldiers are still alive, cuff them. Then we have to go. Only one of the Black Sun foot soldiers, the one that Naruto had kicked in the face, was still alive. Lieutenant Typho, his face drawn with grief and anger, roughly turned him over and bound him hand and foot with stun cuffs. Once he was done, the whole group set off once again. This time, however, they moved with greater caution than before. Even with their slower pace, it did not take long before it became obvious they were nearing their target. More and more cables lined the ceiling, branching in from side passages and blocked off rooms. Mace, with the force enhancing his hearing, could detect the distinct hum of powerful computers churning away ahead of them. As they got closer, less than 100 meters if he was any judge, he could also hear voices. Most of them were men, a mix of harsh outer rim human accents and the more lyrical cadences of Pauline, exactly what he would expect of a Black Sun base. One voice, however, stood out to him. It was female, human if he had to guess, and that alone marked it as anomalous. Most criminal gangs were infamously misogynistic, and Black Sun was certainly not an exception to that rule. From what he knew of their operation, women were scarce, and those who did exist were mostly Falleen. Even more surprising than her presence, though, was that she was giving orders. He could hear her, whoever she was, demanding reports on the location and status of what he could only assume were other droid patrols. Somehow, she seemed to be in charge. Strange as all of that was, something more was bothering him. Mace could have sworn he recognized her voice. He could not place it, not with her voice muffled by distance and intervening walls, but some instinct told him he ought to know who she was. He did not have to wait long to solve the mystery of the woman's identity, however. As they rounded the next corner, the control came into view, not even 10 meters away. 10 Black Sun soldiers were visible through the doorway, but he could not yet see the mystery woman. He crossed the distance in an instant and ignited his lightsaber, Naruto and the remaining guards right on his tail. "I am Master Mace Windu of the Jedi Order," he shouted the moment he entered the room. "Lay down your weapons and surrender, and you will be tried fairly." He had little hope that anyone in the room would actually surrender. Members of Black Sun were notorious for fighting rather than going to prison, and everyone involved in this operation had to know that, if they were arrested, they would never see the light of day again. Despite that, Mace still had to give them an opportunity to avoid violence. He was a peacekeeper, not a soldier. If he did not at least give them a chance, then he was no better than a common thug. As he had expected, the moment the word Jedi came out of his mouth, the room exploded into chaos. Each of the Black Sun gangsters, and he counted 12 now, pulled out a blaster, took cover behind the nearest available solid object, and opened fire. Panika, Typho, and what was left of their men dove for cover of their own, while Naruto began deflecting fire away from their position. All of that registered in the back of his mind, though, because could finally see who the mysterious woman was, and why he had recognized her voice. There, standing across from him on the other side, smiling and relaxed, was Jenna Zahn Arbor. His mind raced. No wonder he had recognized her voice. The infamous scientist had been terrorizing the galaxy for over a decade now. From bioterrorism to narcotics manufacturing to experimenting on sentience, her list of crimes would take hours to read. She had engineered plagues, caused famines, and tortured multiple Jedi. Her dossier was required reading for any Jedi taking missions in the field, and in every encounter, she had proven herself to be a deadly, devious foe. The last Mace had heard, she was imprisoned in a penal colony near Belasco. Clearly Black Sun had freed her, probably to use her skills in whatever experiments they had used to turn the kidnapped citizens into brainwashed assassins. If Zahn Arbor was here, then she would have a plan. Kagan and Obi-Wan's reports had mentioned that she was never without a backup plan, and she had a distressing fondness for traps, coupled with a total disregard for collateral damage. Given her skill set, it was entirely possible the entire planet was at risk. If her reputation held true, then she would have no qualms about wiping out the whole of Naboo if she thought it would help her escape. Even as he ran through what he knew of Zahn Arbor and tried to formulate a plan to capture her, however, she made her move. Without breaking his gaze, she reached for her left wrist, where he now saw she wore some sort of keypad. Before he could do anything to stop her, she pushed a couple of buttons and grinned triumphantly. Mace tensed, bracing for some sort of trap, an explosion, anything, but nothing apparently happened. Nothing blew up. No swarms of lethal droids burst from the ceiling. No clouds of poison flooded the room. If not for her satisfied smirk, Mace would have suspected her plan had failed. He did not detect anything. Apparently his Padawan did, however. A moment after Zahn Arbor activated her wrist computer, Naruto stiffened and his head snapped around to stare at one of the side exits of the control room. Mace looked, but he could see nothing significant about the open doorway. It came as a surprise to him, therefore, when Naruto suddenly bolted towards the door at top speed. "The hostages!" he cried as he ran out of the room. "No, Naruto! Wait!" Mace made to pursue his Padawan, but found himself having to block a sudden barrage of blaster fire before he could take 2 steps. Zahn Arbor had produced a blaster from somewhere, and was firing as fast as she could at him. It only slowed him for a second, 2 at the most, but that was all it took. With a crashing thud he felt all the way in his bones, a heavy blast door slammed shut over the doorway Naruto had just run through. "Sorry, Master Jedi, but he'll have to play on his own for a little while," Zahn Arbor said, her voice saccharine sweet but laced with malice. I'm afraid you have other things to worry about. With that, she pressed another button on her keypad. A previously hidden door hissed open behind her, and she turned and fled through it before it closed behind her. Before she vanished completely, however, May spotted a shatterpoint forming around her. It was big, obvious, and screamed danger and importance. Something about her escape was going to put a lot of people in danger unless he stopped her. May scowled and turned to Captain Panika, who was crouched and using a crate as cover. Find that droid control center and shut it down. I have to go after her. He left no room for argument in his voice. Sure enough, Panika frowned but nodded. Once he was sure the man understood his orders, Mace charged across the room, blocking any blaster fire that came near him. When he reached the hidden door, he did not even hesitate. It was nowhere near as robust as the blast doors were, and he could see its shatterpoint clearly. Without breaking stride, he lashed out with a punch, channeling the force as he did so. The door shattered into a dozen pieces, and he was already through the new opening before the first shard hit the ground. Naruto wasn't sure why his master had been so shocked and wary when he saw the strange, blonde woman in the control room. He hadn't recognized her, but clearly Mace had. Whoever she was, as soon as she fiddled with that keypad on her wrist, he had felt an overwhelming wave of pain and fear coming from the hostages, accompanied by a sharp sense of danger. Ever since he had first felt them back in the swamp, he had been distantly aware of the hostages, but it had been a quiet sort of awareness, like a dull, irritating buzz. He didn't know what that woman had done, but that buzz had exploded into a deafening shriek that drove all thoughts but one out of his head. He had to get to the hostages now. Mace had yelled at him to wait, but he couldn't. He couldn't wait. There were people in agony, and he refused to let them suffer in this dank hellhole for 1 second longer than he had to. Not when he could do something about it. He had made a promise, after all. He followed the sense of fear and pain down the twisting hall. There were no markers to give directions, but he didn't need them. His empathic senses were screaming so loudly that he might as well have had a glowing sign pointing the way. As he drew closer to where the hostages were being kept, his keen ears picked up the faint sound of screaming, along with the crackle of electricity. A faint whiff of ozone tainted the air, and he redoubled his speed. If there had been any thought of caution in his head, it was gone now, replaced by a desperate determination to save the innocent civilians from whatever torture Black Sun was subjecting them to. His furious sprint came to a grinding halt when, once again, he nearly ran straight into another group of battle droids. There were only a dozen this time, but he still wanted to scream with frustration. He didn't have time to be fighting a bunch of stupid machines. Every second he delayed was another second the hostages were suffering. The lead droid, identical to the others save for a few painted yellow highlights on its exoplating, noticed him almost immediately, and raised its blaster. Halt, it said in a mechanical whine. This is a restricted area. All units, open, fire. To Naruto's amazement, before he could set about slicing the droids into tiny pieces, the droids all drooped and dropped their weapons. The leader's vocoder wound down, and, as a unit, the entire squad collapsed where they stood. It took a moment for Naruto to realize what had just happened. Way to go, Typho, he said as he started off down the hallway again, still following the pain of the hostages. After a few minutes of running, the force guided him to a closed door at the end of a hallway. The screams were clearly coming from behind it, as was the wave of agonized fear. He did not want to take the time to slice into the controls and open the door properly, so instead, he carved a rough portal into the door, just big enough for him to clamber through. Even the few seconds it took to do that grated on his nerves. He was so impatient to get through that he didn't even notice the sting of hot metal when he brushed against the freshly cut edges. The moment he was inside, he noticed the cause of the screaming. There were row upon row of cages, each with a person, some human and some Gungan, chained up inside. The chains were sparking with electricity, and each prisoner was writhing and screaming in agony. The assault upon his senses, both physical and force-based, was enough to drive him to his knees. It took a moment for him to push through the horrible din and stagger to his feet. Even then, he had to grit his teeth against the empathic onslaught. It felt like someone was blasting his mind with burning hot sand, wearing him down until there was nothing left but pain. He had to find some way to end this, and quickly. Though his vision was blurred with tears, he desperately cast around for something, anything, that might end the electric shocks. For a long, terrible moment he couldn't find anything, but at last his eyes lit on a computer console set into the far wall. Walking towards it felt like trudging through toxic mud, but he doggedly put one foot in front of the other, arriving with every step to ignore the stabbing lances of pain and fear and helpless help that were tearing into his psyche. He had no idea how long it took him to reach the terminal, but when he finally did, he had to lean on it for support, else his legs would have given out. He couldn't take any time to catch his breath, though. Every moment he delayed was another moment that dozens, maybe hundreds, of innocent people were still being tortured. When he looked down at the console, he almost cried in relief when he saw it was not encrypted or secured in any way. There was a simple digital dial, currently turned all the way to the red, along with a series of buttons and status screens. He reached down and turned the dial back all the way to 0. The effect was immediate. The harsh crackle and snap of electrical discharge vanished, and the deafening screams quickly faded into a mix of relieved sighs and pained whimpers. More importantly, though, the tide of agony that had been threatening to drown Naruto receded back into a more manageable trickle. He sagged with relief and had to fight the urge to slide to the floor and rest. He still had to get the hostages out of their cages and back to medical care and feed. Before he could set about doing that, however, something smashed into the side of his head, hard. Stars exploded across his vision, and his whole head felt like someone had set it on fire. At the same time, a sharp, painful shock ran through his entire body, and his muscles spasmed and locked up. He fell to the ground in a heap and had to fight to stay conscious. There was a high-pitched ringing in his ears, and his thoughts slipped and spun out of his grip while his vision swam in and out of focus. Through his haze of concussed pain, Naruto could see a pair of boots step into his field of view. He tried to make some sort of move, though whether it was to fight or escape, he was too dazed to tell, but his limbs were still twitching and unresponsive. He could hear someone speaking, but he couldn't make out the words. Everything was fuzzy and distant, and his mind was a jumbled mess. He could see the cages in the corner of his vision, and he thought they were important, but he couldn't remember why. Had he been doing something with cages a minute ago? One of the boots kicked him roughly in the shoulder, turning him so he was facing up at the ceiling. Naruto thought it might have hurt, but he was already in so much pain it was hard to tell. Instead of cages, now he could see a man standing over him, holding a stun baton. Was that why his head hurt so much? It seemed likely. The man was human, with pale skin and light brown hair, dressed in simple, but well-tailored clothes. He had an unremarkable face, the sort you might see 100 times a day and never remember. Indeed, everything about him was forgettable, from his hair to his eyes. His bland, unmemorable face was currently twisted into a cruel grin, though, and even with his head still filled with mud and fire, Naruto found that grin unsettling. What was worse, though, was that he could not sense the man through the force. Not at all. No life force, no emotions. It was like he didn't exist. Wah-hoo! The man leaned down, and his grin grew sharper, crueler, more predatory. Hello, little Jedi. My name is Granta Omega. It's good to meet you. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfiction. Looking forward to having you on board again.